Joe. How are you?
Sounds like someone's on the.
Thank you. We're ready to begin. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we are at the Education Committee meeting of February 24th. I'm Mary Ann McKee, School Board. We're going to start to my left. If you would please introduce yourselves.
Jutta Pine, School Board.
Michael Roosevelt, School Board.
Ed Salomon, School Board.
Joe Hidalgo, School Board.
Matt Phillips, IT Director.
Hannah Preston, Administrator on Special Assignment.
Sue Elliott, Substitute Superintendent.
Andy Sanko, Director of K-12 Education.
Chuck Lambert, Director of Special Services.
Jason Harris, Director of Business Administration.
Ed Tate, School Board.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. And we have some folks in our audience tonight who are joining us as well. Welcome, everyone. We have a full agenda tonight. Oh, and I beg your pardon. I believe we have a few folks calling in on the line. Who do we have?
Bob Hickey, School Board.
Looks like that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hickey. We have a full agenda tonight. I'd like to go through our agenda, supplying ample time for our board members to ask questions and discuss. And then as we conclude our meeting, we'll go to public comment at that time. So having said that, we're going to start our agenda with an overview of the district calendar. Dr. Sanko, I believe that's you.
Thank you. So the board and the community has seen this calendar. We, as we do annually, put out an opportunity for the community to provide feedback. We've received 10 comments. We've received 10 comments from the community regarding the calendar, and it's important to note that the calendar we're speaking about is the 23-24 school year calendar, because several years ago we were tasked with having two calendars, two working calendars, 2 school years in advance. Of the 9 or 10 emails received, 8 of them spoke about spring break, returning from what is now 3 days to 1 full week. One request talked about adding Eid, which is a Muslim holiday, to the calendar. And in school year 23-24, that falls on April 10th. It is not on the calendar as a day off of school, but it is identified on the calendar that's proposed tonight. There is one request from the emails we received asking to start winter break later so that the school year could end earlier in June. The recommendation of the administration is to keep all the dates and days of the calendar for the 23-24 school year as it's presented, and to include Eid on the 23-24 calendar on April 10th.
Thank you, Dr. Sanko. Any questions or comments from the board? Yes, Mrs. Paul.
So why we can't provide the full week of spring break? I'm sure there is background that I'm not aware of.
We can provide a full week of spring break. We've done that historically. 4 years ago, 2019, we were tasked by the board with providing a survey to the community, particularly around a full week of spring break or 3 days of spring break. At that point, 54% of our community said that they preferred the 3 days spring break, and we have been operating since that time on the 3-day spring break model. So again, we are not locked into 3 days, and if that is something the board chooses or wants to poll the community in the future, we can certainly do that and revisit it.
So if we provide the full week, that means the end will be later in June, usually?
It could be. The only variable now that's different from when we provided a full week for spring break previously is that we have something now called flexible instructional days, where we apply to PDE and we're permitted under our application, once approved by PDE, to have 5 weather-related days from home where kids and teachers work virtually. So there could be a little bit of wiggle room with those 5 flexible instructional days, but traditionally, and even with the current situation, we could end up going further into June.
Anybody else on the calendar? Joe, Mr. Hidalgo.
Sure. So I looked at it, if you're always looking for feedback, I'm happy to give my personal feedback. I might be on the board, but I'm really just a person and a parent. When I look at spring break's very important to me, my family. If you guys know, I take my vacations with my family. It's a respite. I think it's healthy for most families to take. When I look at the start date of September 5th, I think that seems late in the year to me. I know a lot of schools start early in August, and I know there's a rule that we've probably been following for many years. But in this particular year, I'd be willing to look at starting in the week of the 28th. I mean, it's really August 28th. August 28th. That's really the whole week ahead of time. We get four days in there we could get in if we started on that Monday. It's still August 28th, and it's 2 years down the road for people to plan. That, to me, will give us the days we need to have a full week of spring break, put in a Muslim holiday for people that probably don't get that holiday in many places. It just gives us some more flexibility. So I think the other thing I would look at is we split the spring break for Thursday and Friday, and then we have the holiday weekend, and then we take the Monday off. I would be so inclined to think about, from a vacationer standpoint, if you get like Saturday, Sunday, and that's at holiday Easter, and that whole week after the holiday is usually when things calm down. Imagine we start our holiday on that Saturday, have Easter, and then take the following week as spring break. Would be something just to consider. I don't know, I haven't thought it all through, but these are my thoughts. And so I'm happy we're planning the calendar out 2 years ahead, because if we have to come back and revisit it, I don't want to provide you with more work to do on a calendar right now in the middle of the school year when we have these other pressing issues related to education. So, but I would say that we should leave it open to further discussion, whatever does get passed. And I'd be okay voting no against it, just in its current form, to leave the door open to revisit it maybe in the summer when we have more time. But I do believe a full week of, I just think we're starting too late, September 5th. I think that's really late to start the year.
And thank you for those comments. And if you notice, if you look at the bottom of the calendar, it's hard to see on the screen, but there is language in there with regard to the start date based on when the holiday falls. So we are not obligated or committed to that fully by any rules with PDE. That is strictly up to you as a board, what you want us to do with that.
So, and if I can just share, I'll add a little bit. Dr. Sanko mentioned the survey in 2019. So when we gave that survey, we asked respondents to identify what level they represent to get a sense of, elementary, middle, high school. And at the time, the respondents, and there were 3,500 respondents to the survey, we had 55% of them identified as elementary or middle level. So if you think about where, 3-4 years ago when this was given, where those folks are now, most of them are probably still in school, those kiddos and those families. And when we look at that data, as Dr. Sanko said, 45, almost 46% preferred to start school after Labor Day. Of that survey, and looking at the data, there were 54% who said they thought spring break should be shorter, or Thursday, Friday, Monday, of that group. And in looking at some of the feedback, I think that while we could definitely make changes to the calendar, given the survey feedback we got, given the percentage of those people who identified as elementary or middle level, so they still have kids in school, and given the fact that we had, Dr. Sanko, how many responses? 10 total?
10 total.
10 total responses from people. We can definitely revisit this, but I think the data seems that, maybe we should just keep the calendar as it is for now, and we could administer a survey next year to gather some more feedback from parents and see, from stakeholders, not just parents, but everyone to see what their preferences are with the calendar.
Yes, Mrs. Polly.
So other than personally like to go away for a week for spring break, I think we also have to consider that kids that are in high school and they have to do college visits, so if we give them a full week, they'll be able to plan better for that. And if we want to administer the survey again, we may want to identify, the different like levels and what are their objectives. So if we want to do a full week, I would definitely support that. If you want to wait until we get the data, it's fine. But I think there are good, and 54% is not, it's almost like split in the middle. And, I wonder if the high school, the families in high school, they would be more likely to want the full week so they can, arrange for that. So that's a thought.
Well, and I think too, I will say, and Mr. Solomon, you might remember this, I believe 2 years ago, or actually this before the pandemic, probably 3 years ago, it was the desire of the board at that time, and Ms. McKee and Mr. Tate, you were also on the board at that time, to get a calendar approved multiple years out so parents could plan. So that's the current, what we're currently operating under. So our 22-23 calendar is already approved. So this is looking ahead to the 23-24. So again, it's something that if the board wants to look at making changes to this, it's not next year's calendar. That's already been approved. We could, if that's the desire of the board to do so.
You want to follow back?
Just
I have
one more thing. When the survey was done in 2019, the calendar's moving all the time. So what it looks like this year is completely different than what people were surveyed on, because they're only thinking about that immediate year, and again, I think a survey from 2019 shouldn't really weigh now on a calendar that is completely different. So, as I said, my instincts are September 5th is a way into September to start the school year, and I'd like to see it pushed back to the next week.
And Mr. Salmon, I'm going to come to you next, but I just want to maybe clarify the starting date, whether it's August, September, is based, as Dr. Sanko said, around Labor Day.
Correct.
And that's when we would adjust when the start of school would be, depending on where Labor Day falls. So it's not just an arbitrary, we start in August or we start in September. It's really built around that.
Understood.
Okay, thank you. And Mr.
Just
Salmon?
one question. When is the latest we can keep the kids in school? The PIMS has to be reported.
June 30th.
So no matter what we do, the kids have to be out of school.
And we have an obligation to
Right.
provide the kids 180 days that they're entitled to. So working backwards from that, and then of course holidays that fall in there, the federal holidays, the holidays the holidays where we have off. So working backwards from there, that's where the before and after Labor Day start time kind of falls. So, but the end date, we have to have all of our 180 student days in by June 30th.
Yeah, and I think that gives a little bit more context to how we try to format that. I mean, me personally, I'd like to see a college type of schedule where kids are off multiple weeks throughout the year, bigger weeks at longer times for that break. You look at March, there's no days off in March. I think parents will take their kids out of school whenever they want, regardless of the schedule. I know I've done it in the past. I know, people will do that. I'd be curious to know what our staff absences and our student absences are around the spring vacations. And then the other thing I think we can all kind of get our arms around, should we start thinking about extending the winter holiday an additional week, knowing that COVID is here? We've seen the peak around the holidays. What is our absentee rate that week coming back from our winter vacation? Would it behoove us to keep the schools closed another week to work around that peak that we've seen the last 2 years? I mean, I would be open-minded to anything, but I think my basic statement is no matter what you put here, someone's going to have an issue with. So, and we also can't forget Richboro is not air conditioned. So we have to watch how deep into January or June we go until that school's air conditioned. So, Dr. Sanko, Dr. Elliott, I would defer to you folks on this. I mean, obviously, the support of the board's there for almost anything you do within reason here, but I think no matter what you do, there's always going to be a fault with it. So there are a couple of key things, and Mr. Sanko, you and I have talked offline about, do we think about extending in line with COVID? I'm sure our rates were high with kids missing and staff calling out sick. Buffering that week after, and I like some version of a college schedule where kids are off a lot, and I know our staff struggles with March, because our kids won't see another. Right now, our kids will not be out of school on a day until April, until spring. It's a long stretch. You talk about wellness of the child, wellness of the staff. There's a lot of things we can do to the schedule, but at the end of the day, I think no matter what you do, someone's going to have a problem with it. So I commend the fact that the administration thinks like this, and the most important thing is we land a graduation date that parents can plan around, and the kids can get their senior week credentials in order. So I'll just leave it at that. I'd be happy to have further conversation. I'm happy with this. I think we're at a point in this world where we have to think a little differently more than we did in the past. So absentee numbers for me would be a big deal. Are we seeing a large absentee rate around these smaller breaks, both from our staff and students? Does it make sense to extend it? If we're not seeing it, then keep it the way it is.
Mr. Tate.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what you said, Ed, and a couple of thoughts. One is there are a lot of families who really would object to starting before Labor Day. That's a real sticking point for a lot of families. We heard that, and I personally was one who was happy to see the spring break go away, because there are a lot of families that don't consider that essential. There's a third point that's important. For some kids, and it's not a lot, but for some kids, it's really pretty critical, seniors in particular, to finish the school year at a fairly early point in June. Some of them have to start college in June. Others are going on with summer jobs, and that just applies to sophomores, juniors, and seniors as well. So my thinking is, let's put this calendar in place. We can do a survey and decide if it's necessary to make adjustments. But I think, what we asked the administration to do was to do some long-range planning on the calendar, and we have a good calendar here that meets a lot of objectives. So I favor approving it now and making modifications later if we need to.
Thank you for that. So you're looking to see if this could be placed as a consent agenda item. So I'm looking around. Yes, Mr. Roosevelt.
I'll just add, is there something that prevents us from doing a survey more frequently than every 3 or 4 years? I'd like to see that. And I'll just point out also that 54% of 3,400 respondents is effectively 54% of 30% of our school body. So it represents 15% roughly. It's not half of the school body and the stakeholders. So I would like to see surveys more frequently. I agree with a lot of the comments heard around the board, and I think that perhaps because of some of this changing element, that perhaps we could have a survey a little bit more often. I agree, 10 comments is not enough to stop the press and reverse track, but it should indicate enough to provide us with more surveys. We like that, right? So.
Yeah, if I could just point out, I just want to repeat something Dr. Elliott said, particularly for the people who may be listening. We're talking about the 23-24 calendar right now. Next year's calendar, 22-23, has already been approved. Thanks.
Mr. Hickey, you're on the line. Do you have any questions or comments?
Hold on a second. I agree a lot with what Mr. Tate said. He brought up a couple of good points about, for example, a lot of seniors, they go away in June. They have summer sessions or other commitments that they have to make that actually start in June. So I agree with trying to get these kids out earlier in June is more important than having a 3-day spring break. In addition, the survey went out to all the students on the time. And if they chose not to respond, to me, that means they didn't care or care enough to have an opinion. So I'm okay with looking at this at a later time, but I think we should approve the calendar. And if we would have to revisit it, I think if we revisited it sometime, over the course of the next year, that would be fine. But like I said, I'm okay based on the information that I have. I'm okay with the calendar as is. And I also agree with Mr. Tate when he said starting school after Labor Day. I agree with the philosophy that the school district currently employs. Summer's too short for these kids. At the start and the end of June, and then right away you have off a day, it kind of almost defeats the purpose of starting before Labor Day.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey. So I'm looking to see if we have support to put this on the agenda as a consent item. I'm seeing.
I'm good. Thank
As
you.
long as we survey again.
That can be decided, survey, whether or not to survey can be decided, but to have this as a consent agenda item? No, for Mr. Hidalgo, so perhaps as a roll call vote, it does look as though it has sufficient support.
Yeah, I'd like to just see a survey, maybe not every year, maybe every other year, because I think this changes. I think that I agree with Mr. Salmon, no matter what we do, somebody's going to be upset with something. So that's why perhaps surveys more frequently than 3-4 years makes sense. And I agree with Mr. Hickey. If you didn't respond, perhaps you didn't care, perhaps you missed it. Another reason to have more frequent surveys.
But at this time, Mr. Roosevelt, would you be willing to support this if it's put on the agenda?
I'd like to see a spring break, but I agree, that's fine. I'd like to see the absent rates, but I'm fine with this. But Mr. Hidalgo doesn't want to, so I'd like to see a roll call on this.
Yeah, and what Mr. Hickey was saying, you can have two. You can have start after Labor Day, or you can have a shorter end date, You can't have both. So it's not like, oh, okay, we're going to have a longer spring break, now we're going to push into the summer, take away from the week before. Interesting, yeah. We've done it, there are years when we start before Labor Day. Happens all the time. So it's not like we're not starting sometime, some years before Labor Day. So as I said, it's not a big deal. I could just go consent agenda and just forget about it and try to pull it up later. But if I say no, then I can say, hey, I voted no, I wanted to revisit this. And that's kind of me just putting my finger on it. So that's why I think.
Appreciate that feedback. So it sounds like we have sufficient support, and we'll just have that as a roll call vote.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next up, we're going to talk about learning priorities and supporting student learning amid and after the pandemic. Dr. Elliott, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKee. So this evening, what we really want to do is just highlight, we continue to hear focus, not only within our district, but, regionally and nationally about learning loss and learning loss. What are we doing about learning loss? And so, we want to just highlight some of what we're doing this evening. And I want to start by saying that we understand that the pandemic and the changes to our school learning environment as a result of the pandemic have impacted our students. And they've impacted our students academically, they've impacted our students mentally and emotionally. And we recognize that, and we have in each one of our schools and as a district, since this pandemic started, we have and we continue to really focus on how do we help our kids? What do we need to do? How do we tap into the resources that we have, personnel, time, materials, to be able to support our kids? And prior to the finish of last school year, we really didn't have a lot of comparative data. In that first year of the pandemic, because of when the pandemic started in March of 2020, much of the data that we normally would have had as comparative data that typically happens in the spring, usually after March, we didn't have because we didn't administer any of those assessments, the PSSA wasn't given, so we really couldn't have a point of reference of impact. So what we want to do tonight is just highlight some of the data that we have. And again, this is an overview. This is not an exhaustive look at all of the data, but I can share with you and ensure you that at our building level and at the district level, our folks have dug into all of the data, even more so than what you're seeing here tonight. So I'm going to highlight some PSSA and Keystone data, which is our state assessment, highlight some AP assessment data, and also highlight some of an assessment that we give to all of our first graders, which is the DRA. It's a developmental reading assessment. And then talk a little bit about some anecdotal information we have about students' mental and emotional health, so their executive functioning skills and their mental health, and just highlight those things for the board and the community. So starting with PSSA and Keystone data. The chart that you see here is comparing the percentage of our students who were advanced and proficient in 2019 to the percent of our students who were advanced or proficient in 2021. And then I've added a column here to show you the difference between the two. As you would expect, and I think as is no surprise to anyone in this room, we saw a decline in the percentage of our students who scored advanced or proficient on the state assessment. We know that that most likely has happened across the entire state. The piece of data that we are currently missing is we do not yet have any state data available to us from the 2021 administration of the PSSA and the Keystone to be able to compare and see, well, how much more did people drop at the state than we did? So that's a piece that we don't have access to yet. But when you look at these data, you can see that obviously there was a decrease across all of these assessments, but there was more so of a decrease at the elementary and middle school level with the PSSA. Now, the Keystone Algebra, keep in mind that probably 50% of our students take the Keystone Algebra test as an 8th grader because they take Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and that's when they take the Keystone. So that test represents a mix of students in various grade levels, as opposed to the PSSA is our elementary grades and then 7th and 8th graders. And the Literature Keystone, our sophomores take the Literature Keystone, and the Biology Keystone they take depending upon when they have biology. So some of our 9th graders who have biology as a 9th grader take the Keystone in 9th grade, and probably a good majority of our students who take biology in 10th grade would take the Keystone in 10th grade. So this gives you just a snapshot of some of the PSSA and Keystone data. The next slide is, again, just a snapshot. This is not an exhaustive list of all the AP exams that we give, but this just gives you a sense of how our students did on the advanced placement tests in a sampling of some of those exams that we administer to our students. Here we do have data from 2020 because the AP exams were given in 2020. And if any of you have any students who were in high school at that time, you know that the College Board changed how they administered the AP exam in 2020 because of being virtual. So all of the AP exams were administered virtually. And so when looking at the comparison of the data from 2019 to 20 to 21, I just want to point that it might not be an exact apples to apples comparison because of the change in the test. Nonetheless, you can see here from looking at the average score of our students, and this is our district average. You know, obviously we saw a decline from 2019 to 2020, and in some cases we saw from 2020 to 2021 a trend going back up. So we saw some increases in the average score. And again, keep in mind this is the average, so that means there are students that scored below this number and students who scored above this number. But this just gives you an idea of, yes, we know there were impacts on our students, And, we continue to work to support our students, to help them be successful. And this just shows you kind of where that is at this point and how our students have been doing relative to the state, since we do have the state data there. And this final slide here is showing our developmental reading assessment. So this is an assessment that measures our students' ability in their development as a reader. So in first grade, they're learning how to read, building their phonics skills, building their beginning comprehension skills, and the DRA measures those skills across a gradient of levels of text. And there are ranges within each level or in the grade level across the year of this band of text would be considered advanced, this band would be considered proficient, basic, and below basic. So when you look at the two bars here, the top bar is the spring of 2021. So last spring, again, we did not give the DRA in the spring of 2020. It's a person-to-person test. The student reads a story to you. You ask them questions, so it's not something that you can easily give virtually. So we did not administer it in the spring of 2020. So comparing 2019 to 2021, when you look at the left-hand side of the bar graph, which is the red and the yellow, which would be the below basic and the basic students, we had in 2019, 21.6% of our students were basic or below basic on the spring DRA assessment in first grade. And in the spring of 21, 31.2%, which is very similar if you think back to the PSSA data. Roughly 10+ % of our students, 10 to 15% of a decline in proficiency for our students. So it seems to line up to those state assessments as well. Now, state assessment is starting in third grade, so this is a measure of our early literacy skills and development. And then anecdotally, while it's difficult to quantify some of the executive functioning, which is how you do school, how you function in school, and some of the emotional and mental health, we have been asking teachers and counselors and others to collect, tell us how it's going. What are you noticing? What are you seeing? And anecdotally, what we're hearing from staff, and many staff have shared this with all of us sitting here at this table, that this year, students needed a lot more time to learn and relearn what it means to be a student. So if you think about focus on the academics, you can't really focus effectively on the academics until kids have that habits of, here's what it means to be a student. Things as simple as, I'll share anecdotally what some teachers have shared with me. Many of our kids spent a year online, and it was a very different environment. So in the beginning of the year, a teacher would be teaching in the class this year, and a student would just get up and leave the room to go to the bathroom. And the teacher would say, where are you going? And the student's like, well, I need to go to the bathroom. The teacher's like, well, you need to let me know, and you need to ask. And so simple things like that, where normally our students are, they've got those skills down, they understand some of the expectations, and now they had to relearn those. We've also heard from our staff that they're reporting there's a lack of stamina from our students. That ability to just continue on in their work in school. They get tired, they just need a break, and that impacts their ability to continue to focus academically. And our counselors have also noted what they're referring to, decreased maturity levels in students. So, and teachers have said this as well. So you have, they're saying kids are like 1 to 2 years behind in maturity. So imagine an incoming 9th grader who's acting like a 7th grader, or an incoming 2nd grader who's acting like they're in kindergarten. And so all of these pieces that, while they're hard to quantify, anecdotally from our teachers, this aspect impacts our ability to focus on the academics. And so our teachers have really been working hard to focus on both of those aspects, but making sure that our kids are, understand, like, okay, here's how we function in school, and let's work with you from a perspective of your mental health and your emotional health, because we've all been through this pandemic, and it's affected us all in different ways, and we want to be respectful and help kids deal with that. So there have been a lot of things that we have been and we continue to deal with. So to highlight some of what we've been doing, and Dr. Sanko and Dr. Lambert can also elaborate as well. As we always have done, we make data-informed decisions. Whether it's standardized assessment data or it's anecdotal data from observations, we use data to inform and understand what our students' needs are. As we always have done and will continue to do, we prioritize those needs, and we prioritize how we use our resources to support those. And those resources include time and personnel to really meet the needs of our students. We have, since the beginning of this pandemic, we've been analyzing learning gaps and adjusting our instruction. We've talked previously about how our teachers have looked at the standards that were expected to be learned in a previous course and mapped those to the next course, next grade, next course, and then figured out, okay, where in that next grade or course can I bring that standard back in that I know the kids either didn't master because they didn't have enough time with it, or perhaps because of the pandemic, the teacher never had time to get to it in the previous grade or course. So they're mapping that and they're building that back into the instruction. We're working on those executive functioning skills and how to be a learner and continuing with lessons and helping students build those skills, working on supporting those mental health needs of our students. And of course, we added things such as Summer Academy. We have a middle school tutoring program. We've tried to build in some additional time and supports. And Dr. Sanko and Dr. Lambert, if you want to add anything that you know specifically from how our buildings are working to support our students as we continue to work amid this pandemic.
I can speak somewhat to the executive functioning mental health piece in that our counseling staff, our IST teachers, they're constantly assessing students and looking for where those weaknesses are and where there's gaps. Our counselors have noticed they did do some more directed assessment of kids in terms of interviewing kids and talking with kids. They did get information of students sharing things about sick family members, deaths in their family, financial issues they were having at home, and those obviously are things that we deal with on an individual basis. We do a lot of ongoing, not as a result of COVID, we do a lot of ongoing screening of our kids, and our teachers are therefore addressing those needs as we identify them. For example, we do positive behavior intervention supports. We're implementing that in our elementary schools right now. Part of that, we do a screening. In that screening, we found that our first graders were very low in certain areas where we're not used to seeing them low. So the teachers, and that was because they hadn't been in school. So then the teachers then go back, the counselors work with the teachers on classroom lessons that they can do and interventions they can put in place in the class to try to help that. I think what Sue said, the big thing that we have heard, and I'll be honest, I hear this from adults as well. I think sometimes adults went back to the workplace even later than our kids went back to school in some situations, and I hear them talking about the fact that I find it hard, like they want to diagnose themselves as ADHD at this point because they're saying I find it much more harder to concentrate than it used to be, and I think that's what we're seeing with our kids, that they're having a harder time concentrating. The stamina to continue in reading passages and working on the writing piece is not there this way it was in the past with them. The piece I don't know is, I think we're probably seeing, I'm not in the classroom on a day-to-day basis, so I'm not sure of this, but I'm sure we're seeing some improvement. I just don't know the degree to which that improvement has happened at this point in time, and that's something that we can certainly be looking into. I mean, you can talk maybe more about the...
No, I would echo the stamina comment that we heard from Dr. Elliott and Dr. Lambert. That is has become a common term with regard to adults and children alike. We do continue to do things that we've done before with small groups and individuals, whether it's working directly with the literacy specialist, the math specialist, or the IST. In all of our schools, we have small groups that are led by those folks I just mentioned, in addition to the guidance counselors. And as Chuck said, we don't know how much of that is closing. It's in terms of stamina and the academic growth, and we could certainly dig into that deeper. But we do know that if you take, for example, a second grade student, essentially they really have had zero formal schooling experience because it's been interrupted. If you look at a ninth grade student, they have never had any formal middle school experience because it's been interrupted. And I don't think we can minimize that with regard to not just the things that you heard Chuck talk about, but also the academic slide, where we know across the country, listen, we know this for certain. There's been a 3.1 to a 3.7 month gap in teachers and kids being in front of each other, to no one's fault. But we are working hard. Our teachers are diligent about this. Our counselors are on top of all these things, as are the specialists. But kudos to our teachers and to our kids for trying to regain that stamina that we all desperately need at this point in our classrooms.
Yeah, thank you. And I think too, when we think about learning loss and recovering and getting back to where we were, it's going to take time. And there are aspects of effects of this pandemic that we do not yet know. And we continue to, monitor students and understand not only within our own community, but even outside of our community, what are the impacts of this? And that's something that we'll continue to do. And while as a district, we continue to move forward with other initiatives and things that we're doing as a district, this will always continue to remain a focus for us. I mean, we always are grounded in doing what's best for kids, and our teachers and our principals are really focused and student-centered on, doing what it takes to help our kids be successful, and that will continue. So, Ms. McKee, this item really was more informational. There's no board action required for this item this evening, so if there are any particular questions, we can answer them now.
I appreciate the presentation and your responsiveness. This obviously has been a major source of concern for everyone in our community, so we appreciate you bringing us up to date and the opportunity for comment discussion here.
I got a bunch, but I'll defer to my colleagues.
I have a few too.
Mr. Roosevelt.
I'll start. I think that this is not surprising, as was indicated, but also troubling. And I'm happy to see that we're taking some steps to identify this and close it. The other element of this that I think it demonstrates is not only the negative impact that virtual presented, as well as the negative impact of COVID that was presented, but it really demonstrates how effective our teachers are and how important it is to have kids in school. To see the numbers go down so sharply and then also begin to rise back a little bit, which I believe is what some of the data supports, really demonstrates how important it is to have our kids in school and demonstrates how good and effective our teachers are. That being said, I think that is something that we need to harness and demonstrate how good and successful everybody is. Instead of looking for a weakness, let's find areas that we can build on and support. And that would be one. We need to get our scores and rankings back up. I think that it's difficult, as was mentioned, that we're not really comparing apples to apples, all of this. We don't have consistent data, but it appears that we've slid. I went back to an audited report from the 2015 school year, which for some reason is not included in other audit reports. And it says in 2015, our average score across the 3 exams ranked in the top 25% of the state. In 2016, the average statewide ranking is in the top 7% of the state. In 2016, both schools in all 3 subject areas scored in the top 10% in the state. I don't think we're there right now, but I think that this is something that we can and we should strive to get back toward. With great kids and great teachers, I've got confidence that we can do it, and I think that this is a building off point to give people strength and give people confidence, as well as kids, to get back to this. This is the fundamental core duty of our school, is to be educating kids. And if we fall off of that, we're failing at our main mission. So I like to see the direction of this, but it's pretty serious. Thank you.
So when you quoted those percentages, I'm assuming you're talking about PSSA and Keystone. Is that correct?
Correct. It says all three. So this is in the section that is talking about Keystone and PSSAs. It's a snippet from the audited report that's on Council Rock's website.
Right. So I would say that we don't know where we rank right now because we don't have the state data to compare.
Right.
So it may not actually be that our ranking has dropped because everybody has
Everybody
dropped. So
Totally understand.
yeah. So that's
Totally understand. But, getting back to this level
Sure.
is, we can do it.
We can.
Other comments, questions, Mrs. Holland?
So there's so many surveys around that show nationally. The parents believe that there is learning loss. And on top of that, which is even more serious, is the emotional and mental health of students. And I think at this point, we all agree that it's best for the schools to be open and the students to be in person in school. And that was one of the primary reasons that the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania Research Center recently changed their guidelines, and they emphasize how important it is for the kids to be in school. So we know this is happening, and I really appreciate all the information tonight. I think we have to start thinking about specific actions. What do we need to do to make up these gaps? And I understand it's at the national and the state level, but each unit has to take care of their own community. So what can we do to help them, both academically and also from a mental and emotional perspective? Because if you are not 100% there emotionally, mentally, you cannot perform academically. So it is all interconnected. So if we can think of specific, and I know you probably have already a lot of things in mind, but if we can think of specific things, programs or actions that we can start, that would be really great.
Mr. Tate?
Right. Thanks, Ms. McKee. I was thinking of something pretty, I think, related to what Ms. Pally was talking about, and that is teachers as a profession are very good at sharing best practices, I know. Conferences, professional development, that sort of thing. Is there conversation nationally? Are there new conferences emerging? Are there special initiatives that are going on that we can tap into? Do you need any additional resources? Is that happening? Specific strategies and initiative and tactics to help kids recover their learning loss.
To answer your question, Mr. Tate, I would say I wouldn't say there are new conferences, but most of the conferences and workshops and webinars and everything that teachers have available to attend have predominantly focused on how do we help kids? How do we adapt to the impacts of the pandemic? And really, what are some practices we can share, within our own county? We have many, our IU does a wonderful job of having advisory groups that meet on a regular basis, and in those advisory groups across our districts in the county, people are sharing what's working, what they're doing, what programs they're using, or how they're utilizing staff in different ways. So we're always listening and learning from each other, and helping to figure out, is there something different that we could do with the resources that we have, or we've looked at other programs as well, and so that's something that we do continue to look at and have that opportunity.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Salmon?
Mrs. Marcel.
Mrs. Marcel, did you have a question or comment?
I did, thank you. I had just a couple of comments and a question. One, just wanted to, thank the board and Dr. Elliott, Dr. Sanko for the discussion. I appreciate it. I wanted to I guess it's a comment and a question. First to start is that I noticed that for the keystone for literature, that obviously there was a smaller delta, and so just wanted to see if there's a reason for that, and to also just give praise obviously for the teachers and staff working in that area, that they were able during such a difficult time to not have the scores be impacted and to be helping the students. But I didn't know if there was any discussion or thoughts around that particular one, not really seeing that much of a change.
Ms. Marcel, I don't have an answer for you at this point. Haven't talked to the teachers, the 10th grade English teachers of that course, to get a sense of why they think the data were as they appeared as they do. That's something that I can definitely explore. Dr. Lambert has.
I also can't answer the question, but I could hypothesize a guess. And what I would look at is the analysis of literature is a concept that grows over time compared to biology and algebra, which are very specific skill sets in a specific period of time. So my guess would be it's the good preparation of all of our teachers moving up to 10th grade, I think, for the
10th grade.
That probably helps that. I don't know that would be the case, but that would be my guess.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lambert. That makes sense. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that, agreeing with my fellow board members, I think there's a lot that, we can do to be helpful in this area. And I think that we're looking for, for me specifically, I'm looking for less of the kind of why this happened, but more of how can we support our students and staff and to help, kind of move forward together. And so, that probably is something that is more of a discussion for the future than for tonight. But, I just wanted to kind of make the point that I think it will be interesting to see the state scores. I believe they're supposed to come out next week. And so I think it'll be interesting to see those scores and to be able to, kind of think as a community, how we can help to meet the needs of some of the students, whether it's any additional assessments or what the different members of our staff, what they're advising us. So I just wanted to say that, I'm not necessarily looking for the why, but I really want to focus on more of the positive of the how and how we can work together to help our students. And then lastly, I just had a question. I know I sent an email previously about being able to see the PSSA results by, grade and by school. And I just was wondering if that was something that the board might be receiving, or if there's a future meeting where that could be broken down so that we could just see if some of the deltas are different by grade or by school, given that, we're looking at third grade, to 8th, and making sure that we're just getting a sense of if there are any really large deltas anywhere, how can we get help for some of those students?
So, Mr. Marcel, to answer your question, yes, that is something that I'm in the process of preparing to share with the board. Just have not finished putting it together yet.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Elliott. Look forward to seeing it.
You're welcome.
If I could just jump in there for a minute to Mr. Tate's point or question about, are there conferences and those kind of things? There are that expand our county, like Dr. Elliott said. And just as a point, I registered for one last week, offered through Education Week, Learning Recovery, what teachers need to help students catch up academically. And it didn't necessarily, they didn't speak about data points and deltas. It was really listening to people around the country and what others are doing. And a lot of the takeaway, at least my sense, was that we just need to be talking and listening more to find out what it is our kids need as it relates to this academic slide or learning loss.
Thank you, Dr. Senko. It's very helpful. I appreciate it.
Mr. Hickey, before I go to Mr. Salomon, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do. I am, I don't know, 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 I don't pretty confident that when we get the data from the rest of the state, that you'll find out that Council Rock probably performed much better than most of the others districts. Like I said, we have a great staff, and they do a great job. They also were affected by COVID in the last couple of years, and not necessarily in a good way. But what I do see about this, and it kind of segues into probably what we're going to talk about next. The numbers that you see here are real numbers, are actual numbers, and it's something that we can work to improve upon and have actual plans to improve these numbers, whether, in no matter what way we can do it. And I'm sure our teachers are going to be able to adapt to this, as they've already have to some degree. This is what we should be concentrating on, using this data to help our students improve. And like I said, I'm going to kind of play my hand earlier in this. Instead of focusing on nebulous ideas of a graduating student, we should be concentrating our efforts on how to correct this problem and the best way to do it. Like I said, I'm confident that we can do it. I'm sure that our scores are going to be good compared to other schools, but I'm not really interested in how other schools do. I'm interested in how our students do and trying to make them the best students that they could be, and giving our teachers what they need to do to achieve this so these numbers do improve.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey. Mr. Salomon.
So I have a bunch here, so bear with me. Mrs. Pressman, welcome to the show. Congratulations. Can you give the board and the community listening a sense, because you're probably the closest one to a classroom next to me on a regular basis. Can you give everybody a sense of what you've seen on a personal level?
Sure, I think a lot of...
Don't hold back, please.
No. I think a lot of the things that Dr. Elliott talked about, we are seeing in terms of stamina and knowing how to be a student in the classroom. But I also think I've seen a great progression since the beginning of the school year. I think teachers have been able to take their time with students, and I think they've also been able to focus on the concepts mentally and emotionally that they think is necessary. Like Ms. McHugh was saying, in order to teach that content, the emotional and the mental piece needs to be there. So I think teachers have definitely recognized that and then are able to use that and then are now moving forward academically.
Great. Dr. Elliott, can you give the community and remind the board where the ESSER funds were targeted? Because we are tackling learning loss with the ESSER funds.
We are.
And adding in other places, but this is a good time, I think, to rediscuss.
So we've received several pots of ESSER funds over the last couple years. The first pot has already been spent. We've already utilized that and utilized that to help us with some of the adaptations that we needed to make in the first year with, in September of 2020 with professional development and supporting teachers in learning how to teach online, and also with some of our technology needs. Our second two pots of ESSER funds, we have targeted a significant amount of that to supporting and continuing with our 6, now 5, technology integration specialists. And knowing that particularly last year and as we continue, the use of technology continues to be something that is part of our fabric of how we teach and learn. It is not the only thing we do, and our kids are not sitting all day in front of a computer, but our technology integration specialists really are working to help our teachers shift from, I had to teach everything online last year, to now, how do we go back to, using technology effectively and at the right time as an effective tool. So part of the funds are supporting that. Another part of our ESSER funds are really supporting the expansion of our Summer Academy program. Typically, our summer school program was really targeting our students who were identified as Title I students, which is only in 5 or 6 of our elementary schools, and then our ESL students. With the ESSER funds, we expanded our Summer Academy last year, and again are continuing it this year, to invite students in grades, in entering grades 1 through 12. So our current students, based on academic need. So they are recommended by their teachers to attend Summer Academy. They're invited to attend, And the teachers at Summer Academy will target specific skills based on those students. And I'm sure Ms. Pressman could speak to that because she was one of our Summer Academy teachers last year, so she could talk a little bit about that experience. But we're using the funds for that. We're also using the funds to help support a middle school tutoring program where, again, we're targeting specific students who we've identified through our counselors have some needs and need some additional support, and we're really kind of prioritizing that middle school tutoring program for those specific students. So I know, Ms. Pressman, if you want to talk a little bit about how we met students' needs at Summer Academy.
Absolutely. In Summer Academy, it was a great experience for the students because I think they had that time. The classes were smaller, so it was a lot more one-on-one. It was a lot more focused on direct needs of the students, so you're able to differentiate and work with students on their specific needs, which I think was really helpful. Especially, I had the second graders, so like Dr. Elliott was saying, those students had never really been in a classroom before. And now working with those same kids, when I go into the buildings, I can see that they were able to get those skills as simple as writing their name, how to write clearly on a line, using scissors, using pencils, crayons. Those things were already accomplished through Summer Academy. So now once they're in the classroom, I can see the difference between those students and other students who didn't get that opportunity. So I think it's making sure that we're on that even playing field once the kids are back in the classroom.
Do we have a timeline? Because I know last year we were a little crushed on time and it kind of rolled itself out a little late for a lot of parents who have already planned camps and summer getaways. Are we working towards a timeline when?
We are already in process
Great.
planning for Summer Academy, and it will still be in July, as we have typically held it in July. And it will be 3 weeks this year. So last year we had two-week sessions based on feedback from the teachers, and we decided that it would be better to do a 3-week session. We want you to come all 3 weeks and really focus on helping students with their skills. It will also include an enrichment portion, which we did last year, as we have in the past for those students who we had a STEAM program that we provided for students, and we offered some other enrichment opportunities last year, and we'll offer those as well. Those are not free to our students. Those parents would pay for those, but the students who are identified for the academic portion of Summer Academy, we're using ESSER funds to support that. The other piece too, Mr. Solomon, that we are using our portion of our ESSER funds for is counseling support. We've used some of those funds to hire counselors who help to target some of our students who have some more significant needs. And I know Dr. Lambert could speak a little bit more to those counselors, but we are targeting that with some of our ESSER funds as well.
So I do have a question for Dr. Lambert too. Last year, the state let parents hold their kids back if they chose to. Have we looked at those kids under a different light, so to speak, to see if of them staying back, are we seeing an advantage for those kids? If not, that's fine. And then my follow-up question to that would be, have we heard if the state's going to offer that again this year, to have the kids left behind? And it's fine if you don't know.
I don't know of the students that were held back in the K-12 process. Those numbers were not that significant.
They weren't.
I know the students that I have that were 21 and eligible to stay for
Different story.
They did stay, and they flourished with an extra year of services from us. I heard at one point in time, Mr. Solomon, there was talk of a similar act, but I have no idea where that landed.
Okay. So my question for you, Dr. Lambert, if you would, and if you can say it, if you can't, that's fine, I totally understand. Kids with IEPs, are we seeing more requests for kids to be looked at for additional services from the parents, from our staff? Because I have a great concern with our kids coming out of COVID, that we may need to have a real strong educational plan for some kids that we never really took on before. Because you talk about the kids being immature, not being in a classroom. I know I see it daily, and I know the IEPs are really looked at hard, and they're manipulating where they can. Can you speak to that? And if you can, I totally understand.
I can speak to it in terms of how complicated it is. So we have, I would say there was an increase, I won't say significant, but there was definitely an increase in requests for evaluations, more so last school year than this school year. In our obligation in special ed is we're to identify that whether the student has a disability that's causing the problem. So for us, the complicating factor was that COVID is not a disability. So how do we weed out what's COVID and what's a disability? So a ton of work was done on trying to get our own norms about where a typical, using Hannah's second grader would be in terms of the reading and comparing to that. And for us, it would be more important to provide those interventions through the regular education program. And then if we're not seeing any response to that, then we jump back and look at, do we have a disability present?
Yeah, and I think we all agree, this may be a benchmark here for many years to come in terms of where we are now, as opposed to comparing to where we were. My concern continues to be, where do we go from here? How do we get there? What does it cost to get there? I think the things that we do have in place in Council Rock are strong. I think we're constantly learning. The one thing, I spoke to a staff member last week, and she said that it's hard to teach a kid who's supposed, just using a grade, who's supposed to be in 4th grade, they're basically using 3rd grade everything. So now I got to try to refigure how I'm doing that classroom, where some kids are sponges, and the little people get along quicker. The struggle's there as they get older and older and older. So although these scores concern me, Mr. Roosevelt, they are what they are. But I think this is the year that we're going to be talking about for many years to come. So, from my perspective, we need additional subs in the building to help us out. I think we should consider anything we need to do to try to right this ship as best as we can. But I think we're learning as we're going through this each day. And again, this for me is the year. So I thank you for the hard work. It's never lost on me. My kids thank you. And we got to keep moving forward, because that's what the community wants to talk about. They want to talk about learning loss, what's next for our kids, what can we do? And I think this direction is something we should talk about more often personally. But thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Any further comment? Mr. Tate, do you wish to comment?
I will. I had one other thought. Thank you, Ms. P. Curious about MS tutoring, and am I correct that Summer Academy was hugely popular last year?
I don't know the exact number of students we had, but we had a lot of students in Summer Academy, and our middle school tutoring, that number is a little bit smaller because we're really targeting certain students, but and our middle school counselors are working to identify the students who best need that support. So that number is intentionally not a large number.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Again, I really appreciate this information that's been presented tonight and the conversation among my board colleagues. We all know this is of great concern to everyone in our community. And I echo a lot of what I heard tonight, looking forward. What are we doing now? What are we doing in future? How are we dealing with this on the ground? And in terms of testing, we want to measure ourselves against ourselves. It will be helpful to know what happened in the rest of the state. I think we can all anticipate what that would look like. But we know what we want for Council Rock. And I just want to couple that along with the numbers, along with the test scores. I want to couple that with, we educate the whole child. We educate the entire person who's sitting in front of us in our classrooms. And in thinking about the whole child, I'm reminded of federal meal programs that are put in place because we know children don't learn when they're hungry. Our children are trying to learn coupled with the impediments that they're feeling in terms of their readiness, in terms of their stamina, in terms of their ability to sit and learn. However, I know that our students want to learn. They're motivated to learn. They're great students, and their families are supportive and caring and want the best for them, as do we. I know that every day, teachers, administrators, support staff are looking at the whole child and trying to help the whole child. I feel so encouraged to see the steps that are continually taken. This is just best practice. It's what Council Rock is good at. I have a great deal of confidence in how we're going to get through this. But I also recognize we're in the midst of it right now, and it's very hard to see. There is not a magic wand here, but I am very encouraged and supportive and appreciative of all of the work that's being done every day for this, so thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in? I had some other thoughts. I appreciated listening to everybody going around the room. And I wonder, do we have Summer Academy and MS tutoring for high school? It sounded like that was exclusive to elementary and middle.
So Summer Academy is for 1 through 12.
Okay,
So high school students and middle school students are included in Summer Academy.
great.
The middle school tutoring is targeted just at the middle school students, but we continue to have clinic at the high school.
Yep.
Our teachers are working with students after school, even on non-clinic days, to support them. So, and we also have many of our honor societies, so our different national honor societies for different subject areas. They also provide tutoring. One of the things, if the board remembers, and forgive me, Mr. Roosevelt, I believe this was before you were on the board approved adding our evening library hours back to both of our high schools. One of the big drivers in the need for that was because those evening library hours are something that our students take advantage of. Our honor society students use that opportunity to tutor their peers, and that's an opportunity for our students to come and work together. So that was something when we added that back in the fall. That also is a high school impact on how we're continuing to find ways to support our students.
Great. So that dovetails into what I was going to suggest next. Is there a way that we, and it sounds like there is through some of these after-school programs, that we could conduct Summer Academy actually within the school year instead of taking 3 weeks, or in addition to taking 3 weeks in July, to accommodate that after school or something, to take that a step? And this doesn't need to be answered now, just sort of a thought. I agree with Mr. Salmon. Let's see if we can get some extra subs in here and see if we could accommodate that, if that's what we need. I'll also look to my chair colleague of facilities and see if he agrees. From my position, buildings are really important, but at the same point, education is probably more important. And our facilities are in a great spot right now. And Mr. Taylor has a lot of work on his plate that we just almost approved that should probably keep that in a good spot. I would recommend, I'm suggesting, can we, because I think this is really this important, is to step a couple of those facility meetings aside and double up on education committee meetings. Because I really think that this is something that we are in the middle of this. We don't know where we're going. To find out some extra steps in this, to make sure that our teachers and our kids get some resources. I'll throw that out there.
I want to defer to Mr. Taylor, and while I agree with you that there are some projects in place, I know that there are steps and there's timelines with facilities, the things that have to happen, and so taking those meetings away. And Mr. Harris, you may be able to comment on that too. I'm not sure what impact that would have on the progress of some of those projects.
Certainly. Well, the board did give us direction to see what we can do to move up the projects for Birchboro Elementary. And we are currently working on getting a package together for the board to review. So I think we might have a coterminous approach with facilities, because facilities is important. But when you take on an additional project like that, you're going to need that time to set a table for the board to make informed decisions on how you progress with spending those dollars, and then how that also impacts your general fund budget. So I would also defer to Mr. Taylor.
This is something I think that Mr. Tate and I can handle outside of this and find out if Doug's okay. And I would even submit that, bringing it to our regular meeting. And I don't think this is a permanent thing. This is just a short-term thing, because think we're in a good spot facility-wise where that may not be needed. There's a couple of elements, agreed, but I think this is very important. I want to talk about this. I'd love to see an analysis on our PSSA scores, our keystones, to compare us to us. I think that's probably one of the best ways. I'd love to look at, to find where the deltas are. I'm happy, Dr. Elliott, that you're starting to do that. I think this is really what we need to do. This is what our community needs, because there's a lot of kids. I don't think we can afford to let this move through. We need to figure out how to compress and get the kids back up to speed educationally. I think it's that important. So I'm happy to have that discussion. I just wanted to throw that out there to really maximize our efforts and our discussion and our interaction between the administration team and the board.
And Mrs. Polly, I believe you have a comment.
Yeah, so I think we heard some suggestions tonight and some good ideas. I have ideas too. I mean, I could spend the next half an hour talking about, possibilities, but I think that it would be prudent to trust our administration to come up with a plan, since they are the ones living this every day, and then try to provide our input to that plan. We can also, I'm sure you could also check about what is happening either from the intermediate unit or like from other places that you think they are very reliable and trustworthy, and we believe that they can provide comprehensive support. I think you're definitely moving in the right direction from what we hear, and I am confident that you will do the best to keep the district strong and moving forward, and I'm looking forward to hearing the plan for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are we ready to move on? Okay. Hearing nothing, we're going to talk about Portrait of a Graduate.
All right, thank you, Ms. McKee. So at the last Education Committee meeting, members of the design team presented the proposed Portrait of a Graduate to the board as our district's vision and aspirations for the skills and competencies that are needed in conjunction with rigorous academic content for our students to be successful post-graduation in order for them to thrive. This is linked to our strategic plan and our second goal of that plan with redefining student success. One of the things that is important to think about with this from a perspective of an aspiration is that, we want to make sure we understand as we're thinking with the end in mind, and we're thinking about after students graduate, what do we want them to be able to do and understand. And the academics are important, but we also know from research and from listening to, looking at what research from different companies is telling us, and even from members of our design team, that, it's more than academics that our kids need to be successful in post-graduation, in whether it's college or career. And this Portrait of a Graduate represents that. At the last meeting, the board asked for us to gather some more feedback. So tonight I'm here just to report on that feedback and seek board direction on whether or not there's interest in putting this on the agenda for a vote next week. So we received additional responses to the survey. We used the exact same survey that we had that was used in the wintertime in December into January. And based on the responses that were added, so we had now 702 responses. Earlier we had 439. Of the 702 responses to the survey, you can see there 54.27% strongly agree that the proposed Portrait of a Graduate represents the skills and competencies that we want our graduates to have to be successful, and 29, just over 29% somewhat agree. So the total there is 83.3% either strongly agreed or somewhat agreed that the proposed portrait represents the skills we desire for our students. Looking at the data that we gathered, of the folks that responded, the stakeholder groups represented, and again, this in this particular question, a person could select more than one option. So someone could be both a parent in the school district and a teacher, or a parent and a graduate. So the percentages represent multiple, people selecting multiple options. But again, 50% identified as a parent or a guardian of those that responded. And then you can see there the other percentages. We gathered some data on where our stakeholders live and work, and those that answered. And this question, again, was particularly, it was only for those people who identified as either a parent, a guardian, a community member, or a business person. So anyone who identified as a teacher or a student did not get this question in the survey. So of those that received this question, 53% of them said they live in Council Rock but work outside of the district, and 33% said they live and work in the district. And then there are smaller percentages of folks who either are retired or they live in the district, or they don't live in the district, but they work within the district, so you can see those percentages there. And then finally, this question was asked of our folks who identified as students or staff members in the district. So parent and guardian and business members and community members did not get this question. And of the students and the staff members who responded to the survey, 57% of them identified as working or being at the high school level. And then you see 20% at the middle level, and then of course the elementary grades were fewer. Just of note with this particular survey, students in grades 7 through 12 had an opportunity to respond to this survey. We did not send this out to our students at the elementary level for their response. So that also speaks to partly why those percentages are small. So really, Ms. McKee, we're just seeking board approval for the Portrait of a Graduate. Do we take it to the board? I know that prior to this meeting, I had shared at the board's request the full survey feedback. So you received all of the data plus all of the qualitative responses. So if you had an opportunity to read through those, you see some of the feedback that our community members and those that responded gave. As we had talked last time, based on that feedback, we had a logo that we had designed, but the feedback we got from folks was maybe we need to make that a better logo, and actually the design team from that feedback thought, let's have a contest and let the kids design it. So that is still our intent to do that. That work has not started yet. And this portrait will inform future strategic planning and our thinking as a district. And, you know, it will also, obviously, we'll consider how these competencies kind of dovetail into our existing programming. So, Ms. McKee, I just asked for the board's direction in, will we make this an action item for this next meeting for board approval or not?
Thank you. And this is the second time it's in front of us. I know we had very healthy discussion of it previously. The only thing I think being introduced tonight is the results of the most recent survey. So having been through all that, we've all received that information. Do we have any further discussion upon
I just
that?
have a clarification
Yes.
question. Dr. Elliott, on your overview of a stakeholder feedback, how would a business person or a community member, not a current student, get this survey?
So we provided this survey, obviously anybody who is on our listserv, which does include some community people and business people. We also did a search online for local businesses, and we sent, once we had contact information for local business owners in our district, we sent an email to them, invited them to review the portrait and provide feedback to us as well. And all of our design team members, they represent different organizations and groups, and encouraged our design team members to also share it with other people within their circle of what they represent too. So we did try to reach out more to business people.
That's almost 20% of the feedback.
Other questions, comments? Mr. Israel.
Yeah, I'm still not clear on what the content would be that we're voting to approve, and I'm also not clear how this is not curriculum if it's interfacing with our curriculum and with our methodologies of teaching. So I don't, if it's not curriculum, how and why does it interface? If it's not curriculum, what is the content? Why is there content? And just to sort of ping pong on what Mr. Hickey said, earlier, I want to focus on getting kids to graduate instead of sort of immortalizing some aspect of what we think they represent after they graduate. That's their lives. I think a lot of this is family decision. But, you know, on the surface, from a 30,000-foot view, yeah, there's nothing necessarily objectionable here, but we haven't done a deeper dive, and so I'm still unclear on some of this, on what it is and how it applies.
On the phone, we still have Mr. Hickey and Mrs. Marcel. Would either of you like to comment?
Yeah, just to comment on what Mr. Roosevelt just said, and I have my question here is, I think in our last meeting you said that we would have to develop what the content is going to be to, you know, to implement this fully. And my question would be then is, would we have an opportunity to vote on that content? I mean, I would be fearful or hesitant, I should say, to vote on something and say, yeah, go ahead and let's go ahead with this portrait of a graduate. And now as we all become global citizens in a diverse and equitable world, somehow that translates to what we're teaching our kids that I'm going to have a philosophical disagreement with. So if nothing else, I would like the opportunity to have an opportunity to say, oh, no, I really am not really for this being taught in our classroom, as opposed to like the nebulous idea of what some of these concepts represent. And that's my hesitancy to go ahead with this, is if I say yes, and then well, what's this being taught in this class? Oh, well, that's part of our portrait of a graduate that you agreed to. Well, no, I didn't. Well, yes, you did. So that's where I'm struggling, and since I don't have a satisfactory answer, I'm really leaning against, you know, proceeding at this point in time.
Other comments from the board?
I'll just, you know, I agree with Mr. Roosevelt, Mr. Hickey. I did spend a lot of time researching portrait of a graduate. There's not a university out there that does not have this in their toolbox. And I guess it opens doors for a lot of questions. There's a lot of work that's been done on this by a lot of good people. This was a task for Dr. Elliott to produce. She's brought it to the board, and I think it's worthy of the work that she's done. I don't think that should be discounted ever. I want to talk about learning loss. And if this becomes one of our strategic plans, part of our toolbox in the strategic plan, then so be it. This is not a hill that I'm dying on. Is it important? I don't know. I don't know what's important anymore today, because every time you think you know the answer, something happens. I walk a fine line because I know the amount of work that went into this. When anybody comes out of their house for any committee meeting to work for Council Rock, they're taking the time away from their kids. So I value the work that went into this, and that should never be discounted. So, Dr. Elliott, I support this to move forward. I'm just one vote. I will be watching this close-eyed. This district is in a very big transition right now. And in a couple of months, everything could go out the window with new thoughts for new things that develop. If this is what you need for now to move forward in a strategic plan, I have no problem moving forward with this, based on this product and like products out there that are easily searchable around the country that we live in. So that's just my 2 cents. I want to keep an eye on that, to Mr. Hickey's point.
Thank you, Mr. Salman. Clearly, I am counting board colleagues to see the degree of support or lack thereof. Mr. Tate, do you wish to comment?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. McKee. We got a wonderful letter from a woman who identifies herself as the parent of 4 Council Rock students, and I'll just read a little bit of it. Students, parents, teachers, administrators, and community members collaborating to develop a vision to support our students to become well-rounded, intelligent, and successful citizens beyond the bubble of Council Rock is a remarkable endeavor. I fully support the adoption of this vision in its entirety, and I look forward to their continued work in developing the plan and putting it into action. School has always been about more than just reading, writing, and math, and even more so in an evolving and complex world. Our children need the tools to adapt, collaborate, and gain awareness on a variety of issues so they can be critical thinkers and make decisions based on diverse knowledge and perspectives. And she goes on to cite a number of universities that really, to Mr. Solomon's point, articulate these kinds of values and objectives in their academic environment. Now, how this translates into curriculum is work that our administrators and teachers will do collectively as they do on a continual basis. Am I right, Dr. Elliott? Curriculum development is an annual, continual sort of process, and it is done, as I understand, by committees of teachers and administrators and subject area coordinators. It's done collaboratively. And while we don't necessarily sit down as a board and review new curriculum, we review textbooks, we talk to parents, and I trust our teachers and administrators to design curriculum, which of course is done with the state mandated objectives in mind and some very tangible learning goals. But I trust our teachers and administrators to come up with curricula that meet the needs of our students on a very practical level, but also address these kinds of really important critical learning, as an example, really important skills that are absolutely life skills. So I love the Portrait of a Graduate. I think it's a really valuable tool. Oh, and there's one other thing. I'm really glad, Dr. Elliott, that you pointed out that this was created to address the goal of redefining student success. And if I recall correctly, part of that conversation was that we don't want to define student success by their grades, by their SAT scores, by where they go to college exclusively. We've got to be more creative in how we define student success. So the Portrait of a Graduate is a guidepost to help as we continually redefine student success and develop curriculum. And I encourage any board member who wants to keep, wants to be engaged in the curriculum development process. I don't think the doors are ever shut around here. If we want to know what's going on with curriculum, all we have to do is ask. And I think this is a wonderful strategic planning tool, and I really applaud everybody who's involved in development. So I strongly endorse the Portrait of a Graduate.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Mrs. Polly, did you wish to speak?
Yeah, so I think adding to what Mr. Tate just said, I think in that same letter, it also talks about different universities, well-known, small or big, and what they're looking for, and we know the majority of our students will apply to college, and we want them to be successful getting into college and while they're there. But I do want to talk about my personal experience from a business perspective, because I am a business owner and I've been for a long time, and I also participate in investments like with startups. So when these companies come and present to us seeking capital, we have to look at like different checkboxes. So you cannot imagine how many times a company comes and they are rejected because of their management team. maybe the product or the service is great, their plans fantastic, but if the management team doesn't check, it's an automatic rejection. And these management teams, it's not the hard skills that they're required because they have them. They are not going to be able to be at that point without the hard skills. So what the next thing is, can they work in teams? Can they empower each other? Do they have critical thinking? Are they able to operate successfully in the global environment? Because most companies operate throughout the world. They're not located in a small town somewhere, but to be successful, they have to be able to think globally. They have to be able to work well with people from like different backgrounds that are diverse. They don't look like them, and they have to be able to respect them. And also they have to be coachable, because no matter how good somebody is, if they're not coachable, if they're not open to criticism, if they don't have the people, the soft skills, they're going to fail in this economy, in this like global world that we live in. So this portrait of a graduate, I think, it is in the right direction of creating the portrait of a person that will graduate and be able to succeed in this changing world. I think, again, what is our objective? So we create this portrait as an objective, and then we try to get there. We are not creating curriculum. We're not telling them exactly what it is or how it is. It's more of an ideal, and then the administration will have to figure out how to get there. So I think I'm very supportive of this because I know it's needed out there. I see it every day. It's not an ideal, it's something that's absolutely necessary.
Mrs. Marcel, Mr. Hickey on the line, do you wish to comment?
I already commented. And like I said, I don't want to discount the work that everybody did on this project. I've been part of, some of these groups that done work, and like I said, I appreciate all the efforts, and it's not like all the ideas I disagree with. There's just some of the ideas I disagree with that I have reservations about, and getting behind it 100%. But like I said, I appreciate the work that was done by everybody, and and if it does continue, hopefully they'll continue to do good work on this project.
Thank you. Mrs. Marcel?
She may have also.
Oh. Okay. All right. If everyone has had their moment, I've spoken in support of this at our last meeting, and full disclosure, yes, I was one of the participants on the design team. I'll just reference what I said before. We're here to teach the whole child. We're here to look at the entire person. And when I spoke about this last month, I used the word aspirational. And in so many of the comments that we have seen from the survey participants, oftentimes they reference, this is what I want for my child. I would like for my child to be the person who possesses these skills and these habits of mind. Apart from the fact that we know that, as Mrs. Polly referenced, these are most relevant in the work world, in the career world, in functioning in our global world. It's also just about how we relate as human beings to each other. I don't see this as specific to a curriculum. I said at our last meeting, PSSA does not test on many of these items. It's more about how do we design instruction to give children an opportunity to be a member of a team, to learn how to hear criticism, how to rethink an idea, how to persevere when they're not at first successful. Those are the kind of things that happen every day in our classrooms, and I think it would do Council Rock great credit for us to stand behind this and say, here's what we want for our children, because we know that this will help them in their lives, pre and post graduation. I strongly support this, and as I said, I think it would be a great credit to us if we could all give our support to it. But as you say, Mr. Salmon, I'm but one. So as I'm counting around the table, I'm seeing a yes. Mr. Roosevelt, a no.
Yeah, I don't have enough information, like I said before.
Okay.
And the other, just to sort of add on to this, are we not able to teach critical thinking, conflict resolution, group cooperation without approval of portrait of the graduate? And your point, a lot of these ideals occur already in our school. So to that point, if it's already occurring, what are we approving? Why is it needed? So I'm not necessarily a no. I just don't have enough to be a yes. A lot of this is in universities. I understand that. How many of them are in high schools? How many of them are in public schools? How many of them are in K through 12, this portrait of a graduate? So that's what we are. We're not a university. So these are the areas that I'm unclear about. And it's very difficult for me to write a blank check.
And if you wouldn't mind me responding in part to what you said, in my experience in Council Rock, because it may not have been done elsewhere, has never stopped us.
Sure.
And I find this to be something of value, something that really speaks to, again, not just our priorities, our aspirations for our kids. And I truly do respect your objection, Mr. Hickey's objection, when you feel that this will be rooted in curriculum. I see it differently. I see it truly as a guidepost, as a vision, as something that we all keep in mind in dealing with kids every day, so that it's not necessarily a part of your math class, but when you're working cooperatively with someone in your math class, this comes into play.
But if we're already doing it, why do we need to approve it?
I think it formalizes, and as referenced before, it helps us in our strategic planning. It helps us in looking ahead. And please, anyone else, feel free. I don't mean to dominate the conversation here. But I find it of value for that purpose. I think in giving, we've always had mission statements when we talk about our district. I think it helps our staff, it helps our community to know that this is what we're about. This is what we stand for. But as I said, I don't mean to dominate. If anyone else wishes to chime in. Mrs. Polly, I take you for a yes.
Yes.
And Mr. Tate?
Yes.
And Mr. Hickey, I understand, objects. Perhaps what needs to happen, Dr. Elliott, since we're missing a few members, I may need to reach out individually to them. And if there is not a support for this, then there is not support.
Okay, so you'll let me know.
Yes.
Okay.
So we cannot discuss this. We have to agree in advance. I think the public needs to know what is going on. And if we disagree or we agree, we have to make our case. And then if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. I don't think necessarily that right now, I mean, even the no's, maybe they can be persuaded by then. I don't know. I mean, I would ask to have it on the agenda.
Well, obviously, we're having public discussion tonight. It's the second time before us. I would be hesitant to put this on an agenda if I thought it would fail. I truly would. I think that would be, again, with all due respect to my colleagues who disagree with me, and you're most entitled to, but especially as a member who participated on this, I think it would be a disservice to put it up for a vote and not have it approved.
So you want to, how about a suggestion of making it a discussion piece on the agenda? Getting everybody out on the line there, and then moving it into a motion.
If we find sufficient.
So, out of respect to Dr. Elliott, the committee, the team that worked on this, this either needs to move forward or it needs to not.
Yes.
And I don't think we keep carrying this month to month.
Agreed.
So, to Mrs. Valley's point, do we, I don't have a problem putting it on as a discussion piece. If we get 5, I think at that point we should go to roll call and either move forward with it or decide that we're not going to.
I appreciate that suggestion.
I think that the only The only addition to that would be, if, Mike, if you want more information for whatever reason by next week, I would suggest that we get to Dr. Elliott and ask her to provide it. But I think out of respect to the committee, we should make a decision less than 2 months.
I appreciate that
To your point
suggestion.
about learning loss, I want to talk about that. So that's kind of where I would go with that, if that's okay, Mrs. McVeigh.
No, I
My
do, I
suggestion.
appreciate that suggestion. I think that's a direction for us to take.
Okay. So I'll make sure we put that as a discussion item.
Put it
with
as a
possible.
rule, yeah.
Yep, I can do that. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Ready to move on to the gifted review? Dr. Lambert is going to provide us an update.
I hired Dr. Seinfeld to handle the technology for me. At some point in time, there was a request made to review our current gifted program. We've done this in the past. The request came again. And something we're certainly glad to do at all times. There was a plan set forward. I'm assuming the board saw this at some point last spring, the plan that was developed. And the plan involved a stakeholder group, a focus group looking at our current programming and coming up with some suggestions, which we have done. The next step in that process for us was for us to take it out to stakeholder groups, parents, students, teachers, community, and get input on the plan that we were presenting. I felt uncomfortable going out and putting this out there for public consumption without getting a sense if we're in the right direction here. Because I don't, you put something out there, start to gain momentum, and then I just want to make sure that that's where we're moving in the right direction. So my purpose tonight is just to kind of share where we are currently in our thinking in terms of how we can make some revisions to the gifted program, and then hear from you whether that's a direction that you feel comfortable with continuing to explore. Nothing's been decided, nothing has been fully vetted out. It's just we want to make sure that we're in the right direction. When we did a survey of parents, students, and staff members regarding our gifted program, had about 1,000 responses to that survey. When we looked at the survey data, the data itself, the numbers, you read it and it said, don't change the thing, we like it the way it is. So, which was somewhat surprising to me because we've done reviews in the past and there have been some questions that we thought people maybe had some concerns with. We just started talking to some people and reading we had in the survey, we also included some narrative responses, open-ended questions. Some of those responses didn't fit with the numbers data that said, don't change anything. So we started asking some people informally, and I think what we ascertained was that people were afraid when they saw the survey that it was attempted, we wanted to take the program away.
Oh.
And people didn't want that to happen, so they were saying they were satisfied with the program as it was. So we then just delved deeper into pages and pages and pages worth of narrative responses. And from that, we took away the major theme was a concern that our program is focused in the social studies department and that's where it's housed in the humanities class. So when the students are pulled for their gifted support program class, that happens through the social studies department. And people were basically saying that they don't feel that that's addressing the needs of all the students who may have strengths in other areas. So that's where we decided we were going to put our focus in moving forward. Thank you. So where we have landed on this, currently at the elementary level, if you're identified as a mentally gifted student, you are pulled out of your regular class for your social studies instruction. We have gone at lengths over the past years to make it so that it's not just social studies curriculum. We try to make it more interdisciplinary and include other topics in there. So I think the teachers have done a good job of compacting that social studies curriculum so they can expose the students to other areas. But it is indeed in social studies. Our recommendation in moving forward is that we do this in both social studies and science. Therefore, the teachers of the gifted would be able to work through the science curriculum as well and incorporate more of the math science strengths that students may have into the programming, and then also continue with it in the social studies area. That's our recommendation at the elementary level. We would continue with the same recommendation at the middle school level. where we would include, currently the same thing happens as 7th and 8th grade students go to a social studies class that's identified for really gifted students, and we would expand that to include science sectioning as well. Our current thinking is for at the high school level, we currently, again, at each grade level, there's a social studies section that the students can opt to take for their gifted class. What our recommendations would be at the 9th grade, and these are not set in stone which one is which in which grade, but just the general concept. As I said, we're still just exploring. Just wanted to put this out there to you now. But in working with the curriculum coordinators, we thought about if there would be an option for gifted programming in English and science in 9th grade, so you have the language arts area and the science area, and then in 10th grade move it to social studies and math. Students could elect one or both of them. They would not have to take both of them. Then in 11th grade, flip back to English and science, and in 12th grade, go back to social studies and math. So that would give the students at the high school level an opportunity to delve into any of their areas of strength in all the four content areas across the 4 years. What this allows us to do is, when you look at the research on gifted education, it's always been quite clear that the students benefit from some time with likability peers. So we've tried to keep, there are some school districts that have gone away from a programming where you separate gifted students, where they're in the regular class and you push it in. We wanted to maintain that time for these students to have contact with their likability peers. Research supports that's important. So that allows us to keep that and increase it. We're going to talk about the elementary schedule, so the minutes change a little bit, but it does increase the time. It increases our opportunities for inclusion of math and science content into the program. It increases opportunities for curricular enrichment and thematic study across all of the disciplines. And it certainly increases options at the secondary level for students in different content areas. And again, preliminary looks, we haven't delved too deeply into it yet, but at the elementary level, we think we can accomplish this when we look at it in conjunction with some of the other schedule changes at the elementary level without any increase in staffing. At the middle school level, our initial look at this is it would be an increase of possibly one staff member to be split between the 2 middle schools. We had a meeting yesterday where we looked at this again a little bit more carefully. It might be a little bit much less than one, but it might also be a little bit more than one. So we still have to narrow that down. At the high school, and you might have an increase in a section, in a grade, in a given year, and you might not. When you have a gifted support class, there's a state requirement that class cannot be larger than 20 kids. So when you create that section where you might have had 30, 32 kids in that class, we have to limit it to 20. Those kids then the other kids would have to be dispersed elsewhere. There might be years in a given class where they can be dispersed and it doesn't require the addition of an additional section. There might be years when we look at it, it's going to say, no, we need to bump an additional section for that to happen. Our guess is that we probably wouldn't be looking at more than 0.2, which is one section per grade per year. But again, until we actually delve deeper into it, I don't want to lock into that. And that is an overview of where we are now. Our next steps, we have discussed this amongst our focus group, our task force, committees, I get the names back, with our task force, which is representative of staff across the different levels, and Dr. Elliott, Dr. Sanko, and myself. We have delved into this to some degree with our curriculum coordinators. We have to now reach out to our teachers to get their input on this, both our gifted support teachers, our regular education teachers, and then we would then bring together focus groups of parents and staff to talk at it more differently. And students. I think with students, we're sticking at the secondary level for students. I think when we did the survey, the elementary kids did it.
I think
6th grade
yeah.
students did it.
So I think what we're looking for, what Dr. Lambert said, is we're looking to get a sense of, from the board, this isn't an action item. This is, do you want us to continue to go down this path, continue with this process? Based on what we have right now, this is where we think we're going to be going with this. But again, it requires more work to finish the review and finish what we're doing. So when we think about how we're expending our time and our resources, we want to get a sense from the board, is this something you want us to continue with? This does dovetail to the next agenda item, but I do want to give folks an opportunity to, Ms. McKee, respond or ask any particular questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll open it up to the board before I comment. Yes, Mr. Tate.
Thank you, Dr. Lambert. I think this is really promising, and it brings to mind the elementary schedule, and the fact that the board sidetracked some modifications to the elementary schedule last year. I think it was last year. 2 years ago. And I'm just wondering where that stands. Briefly, obviously, I don't want to get us off on a tangent, but.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Good, thank you.
Good. Ms. Polly?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of experience with that, the gifted program with my family. And once someone qualifies to be on that program, it's because their IQ is over a certain number, right? But that person can have a higher IQ in some areas and lower in some other areas. So I like what you're proposing because it addresses kids that can be gifted in different areas. So it's not only social studies. Maybe someone is better in science or in math, and these are the attributes that make them gifted more than others. So it makes total sense to do different subjects, and also I think that goes in the direction where we may want to go with more STEAM support and encouraging cross-functioning between different subjects. So for me, I think we're in the right direction. I'm not sure about the combinations. I can't speak to that, especially in the high school. But I think doing more than social studies is a great idea.
Ms. Roosevelt?
I like what I see and I like what I hear. I definitely think that this is where we should continue to develop. This is the core of our education, and this is where we should be spending more time discussing and devoting our energies to. So I'm in support of this, and I like the direction it's headed.
I won't speak for another board member, but Dr. Forward this has been his baby, and I believe the last time this was reviewed was in 2013. I spoke to Dr. Forward today, and Dr. Elliott, I don't recall him having any objection to anything here, but I will not speak for him, but I will ensure that I give him a message that if he has a problem, reach out to Dr. Lambert. I appreciate the work. Again, this has not been reviewed since 2013. Do the math, it's a long time. Just so I'm clear, you're talking about possibly adding a 1.0 at the middle and possibly a 0.2 at the high school at this present time? Or I may have missed that when I was out, I do apologize.
Our guess right now that he would probably be looking at a 1.0 at the middle school and a potential of, like you might need 0.2 section 1 year at the high school, you might need 0.6 another year at the high school.
And the slide does say that, so that's actually 2 staff members total.
My guess would be it should not be above 2.
Okay.
Again, we haven't really delved into looking at those exact numbers, but.
And that's fine, and I think, as we walk down the walk, things are going to stretch and move around, but I look at Mr. Harris down at the end there, we talk about additional staff, that's additional money, so, and in the next couple of slides, we're going to be talking about additional staff, additional money, so make sure that's in our mindset as we look at our budgets, projections here and several years down the road, so thank you, Dr. Lambert, the work is outstanding, appreciate it.
Thank you.
And to clarify, Mr. Solomon, the 0.2 at the high school, it may not necessarily be hiring a new staff member. We have some staff members who are not a full 1.0 person. So it could be that that person might move from being, say, a 0.6 employee to a 0.8 employee for the time period. So it doesn't necessarily mean.
Yeah, it's hard to bring somebody in for 0.2,
Yeah.
right, I get it.
And Mr. Hickey, if you're on the line, any comments?
The simple question is, should we proceed with this? Like I said, I can appreciate all the work that everybody has put into it so far, and the simple answer is, yes, proceed.
Yeah, agreed. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So on to our last item, and actually you'll see in this some mention of the gifted review as well, because it kind of dovetails into all of the priorities. So for the next several slides, our intent tonight is to really provide a high-level overview of some different programming and priorities for education. And we're doing this because we want to ask the board direction so that our administrative team, not only our cabinet team, but also our principals, curriculum coordinators, and teacher leaders understand how to best invest our time as we continue on through the rest of this year and planning forward. So what we're going to provide you, while it may, in what you hear, elicit some questions and wonderings about, well, how is this going to look, or what are some specifics, please know that much of this right now has been, we haven't dug down into the weeds for much of this yet, because we don't want to do that until we know if this is a direction that the board would like us to continue to take. Because, as Mr. Solomon said, most of these have some budgetary implications, and we want to make sure the board's fully aware of what those possibilities are. Again, those are all estimates, but we asked Mr. Harris to be here tonight to help with thinking through this from a projection standpoint of how any of these pieces fit into that. So between Dr. Lambert, Dr. Sanko, and myself, over the next few slides, we're going to tag team and kind of give you an overview of some of these pieces. The elements we're going to highlight are these. The enrollment study, that is the study that was approved in December by the board to hire Cropper to do another demographic study of our district. Looking at, Mr. Tate, to your question, the fifth special at the elementary level and subsequent master schedule revisions that relate to that, as well as gifted in other aspects. The implementation of a social and emotional learning program at the elementary level, the gifted review, which you just heard about, math program review, which is also currently underway, middle school schedule revision you'll hear about, and then high school schedule revision. We will, after going through these, we will provide what our administrative recommendation is, so you know what we think is important to prioritize right now. But again, we are seeking board direction on how to proceed. So I get to start with talking about the enrollment study. So as you know, we've had some challenges with space utilization, particularly in one of our elementary schools due to increased enrollment and distribution across those grades at Wrightstown Elementary School. And that's precipitated the need for us to find some more data and look at some things. So as the board approved Cropper GIS, who had done some work with us with our previous redistricting, to do an updated demographic study. Cropper will be with us on March 24th at the Education Committee meeting to present that study. He'll be here remotely, but he will be with us to present that. One of the other pieces of current information that really informs the decisions we make, particularly at the elementary level, is our district's June 1st deadline for registration. Basically, if you register by June 1, you're guaranteed to be in your home building for those that are newly registered. If you register after June 1, we can't guarantee necessarily that you'll be in your home building. So that's a piece of information to know that informs kind of how we have to think about this. We don't have, at this point, any sense of which way we need to move as a district, because we need to see the data from the enrollment study. But some of the options that we may need to consider, and the board will need to consider, are do we look at how do we creatively use space that we have available to us in the building, particularly in Wrightstown? Do we exercise flexibility with our class size guidelines? So right now we have class size guidelines. So for example, 25 is the guideline for first grade. So do we exercise some flexibility? For example, if we have currently, by June 1st, if we have 51 students registered for first grade, that is 3 sections. Now, if we exercise some flexibility with that, 51 students, we could say, let's keep it at 2 sections. One of them will have 26, and let's talk about what kind of supports do we put in place for that classroom teacher. Perhaps we hire some instructional assistants to support. Again, that's an option that we can consider. Additionally, we can consider a spot redistricting, which would just be looking at the targeted areas where we're seeing some of the issues with space, and look to make some movements of students into some other buildings. And then a final option, which has a cost to it. We don't have an estimate of that cost right now to share with you this evening, but you can estimate that it's going to be in the millions of adding some classroom additions onto Wrightstown. That comes with a lot of pieces to it. And for the sake of solving this challenge for the 2022-23 school year, the last one of classroom additions would not be able to happen for this next school year. So that is in the enrollment study piece. Dr. Sanko, I believe you're talking about the fifth special.
Yes, so we've much like Dr. Lambert with the gifted review, we've spent some time looking at a fifth special. We know that, and we've heard that there's an interest and an appetite for a fifth special, the STEAM special. We've looked at this as part of a revision to an elementary master schedule. As was mentioned earlier, we tried to revisit that master schedule 2 years ago, so there's some trepidation around it as it relates to the overall overhaul of the elementary schedule. We have begun looking into physical space in order to place this fifth special. And as Dr. Elliott just mentioned, spaces at a premium, particularly at Wrightstown Elementary School. The included funds for curriculum development, Dr. Elliott has budgeted. And in terms of staffing this, we have discussed staffing it much like we staff our other specialists, art, music, phys ed, and library, where teachers take on a caseload and share school buildings based on the population at that school. We believe that because of the ongoing evolving global workforce and the needs, there is a need to get STEAM on a more consistent, regular basis in front of our kids at the elementary level.
Dr. Lambert's going to talk about the elementary SEL program.
So as part of our strategic planning process, we have identified that we wanted to explore implementation of a social emotional learning program in our buildings. A lot of work went into looking at this. Mostly we were, right when COVID hit, we were at the process of being where we are now. So a lot of this work occurred prior to COVID. We then had to circle back and re-pick up. But we had a team of individuals who represented, we made a decision based on looking at some of the programs. It would be best to start at the elementary level, not to dive in K-12. We weren't sure that once we started doing elementary program, what would the needs be at the secondary level? Would they then become different? So we decided, and most of the programs have a focus K-8 first primarily. So we made a decision to focus on the K-6 level. The team that was involved, we relied heavily on a research study out of Harvard from 2017 that looked at the top 25 research-based SEL programs that are out there. So we focused on those. Their literature review identified certain areas that are what they found to be critical components of social emotional learning program. There's also an organization, CASEL, which is the Collaborative Academic and Social Emotional Learning. I might have it a little bit wrong. It's done a ton of research on that. So combining those, we looked at what are some of the important components of a program. We then surveyed our staff with questions based on those different categories. To find out what did our staff feel that our kids needed most? What did they see as the biggest priority? So you had this list of 20 things you might see in social emotional learning programs. What did our staff see as the need for our kids? And we came up with a list of, excuse me, the top 5 were treating others with respect and kindness, understanding emotions and remaining calm, being empathetic and perspective taking, improving self-esteem and self-confidence, and maintaining attention and focus in the classroom. So that's what our staff identified as being the needs for our children. We then went back to the programs and looked at, from their research, which ones had heavy focuses in those foci, in those areas. We then started with the programs that we narrowed it down to from their 25, We then started looking at the different programs. We looked at how much time is needed. Time is at a premium, as you're hearing here. We looked at how much time is needed, what the staff development requirements, what kind of materials are used, and what have you. It was important to us on the committee to make sure that whatever we elected and selected, we were going to expect that it was going to be implemented. And if we were going to expect that it was going to be implemented, we wanted to make sure our staff had time to do it. So the time piece was a big one for us. So in looking at that group of 20, narrowing it down, we kept narrowing it down, and we came down to 2 programs. I understand that I'm coming back soon to do a more thorough presentation on this. So I'm not trying to be secretive or anything, but I'm not going to say the name of the program because Dr. Black and I just last week got access from the company. So we're now in the process of going through each of the lessons to make sure they contain what we're trying to accomplish in the program. So I will make every effort before we come before you again to have finished that process. We can talk about what that program is. The 2 that we narrowed it down to were not significantly, well, I shouldn't say not. There were some differences in the time component required of them, but we were not looking at the one that we're thinking of is probably a 20 to 30 minute commitment on the classroom teacher's part per week. You can expand that, but the core piece of it is about that. We looked at the staff development. We think we can manage that for implementation. It's digitally. We get the information digitally, and the teachers would then, present it on the smart board. I'm saying wrong. We don't call it smart board anymore, but in the technology in the classroom, and the estimated cost for those licenses across the elementary schools is $20,000 per year.
The next is gifted. I don't know, Dr. Lambert, if you need to say too much more about that since you've already kind of talked about that. But basically, you already had the gifted review, and you see there the estimated fiscal impact. Next is the math program review. So similar to the gifted review, we're charged to conduct a review of K-12 math programming. That is currently in process. We're looking at various data, including student data, course progression data, looking at best practices, getting some survey data from students and staff, and identifying some recommendations for what improvements we can make to our math programming. This review is not about looking at selecting a core resource. This is about the overall K-12 programming that we provide for students. How do we provide opportunities for students to get access to different levels of courses? As many of you know, in our district, and every district has this kind of key point in time in the mathematics progression. For us, it's 7th grade. The math class that you take in 7th grade dictates what classes you will be able to take all the way through high school. And so for a student who might be in academic math 7 right now, that student has no opportunity to get to calculus if they choose to do so. So one of the things in this review that we're looking at is how do we create opportunities for access for those students who might like that opportunity, that maybe in 7th grade they weren't ready for Honors Math 7, but later they might be ready for a shift if they want to do it. Additionally, one of the things that, so far that we've uncovered in this process and is that at the elementary levels where developing those foundational math skills is so critically important, much akin to, you think about how important it is to learn how to be a reader in primary grades. Well, there are a lot of foundational math skills that if our kids don't have those skills, it impacts later. And we, because of staffing, we really don't have enough staffing to be able to provide intervention as we feel we should for those students. So again, we're finishing this study, and this is something that we'll come back to the board with some more information on once we finish it. But we're anticipating that there could be some cost with some course development of a potential summer course that students could choose to take. that if they wanted to move up and have opportunities to get to a different progression of mathematics courses, and also possibly increase staffing with an additional math specialist at the elementary level to be able to have more opportunity for support. And then Dr. Senko is going to talk about the middle school schedule revision.
So our middle schools, when we transitioned years and years ago from junior high schools, excuse me, to middle schools, we adopted a period at the front end of the day called RA, Resource Activity Period, and that was primarily, and still is primarily, dedicated to the music program. And so historically, too, has been that the middle school schedule has been a rotating schedule. And this, we believe, is probably the lightest of the three lifts among the elementary, middle, and high school as it relates to the schedule for several reasons. But one of the things that we've looked at is locking in period one each day at the middle school. And the primary reason for that is we now have elementary students who we transport to the middle school. While the number's not large, we still need an opportunity for those students that have to go to the middle school to take math, an opportunity to do that. So we would have that first period locked. And then the other thing we're looking at doing is moving that RA period, that resource activity period, to the end of the day. So typically, right now, our students don't go at the middle school level, do not go to their first period class until 8:45 after RA. We're talking about and have a desire to move it to the end of the day so that students, and the number one reason for that is so students have second chance learning opportunities in front of teachers. Now, it will impact the music department to some degree, but we did look at data analyzing which students are in the music programs and also in our sports programs. We don't have a lot of longitudinal data, particularly for Newtown Middle School, because it's relatively new, and there is some overlap with that. We believe that doing this, also moving RA to the end of the day, will eliminate the number of times teachers who are also coaches or sponsors of clubs would have to leave for a competition in another district. And the anticipated cost really is zero. It would necessitate some schedule finesse, particularly with the music program, because as you know, like many of our specialists, they share different buildings, and some even share different levels, elementary and middle school, or middle school and high school.
And then finally, the high school schedule revision.
So several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we looked at an overhaul of the high school schedule. And in fact, that conversation has gone on decades. And we know that the current schedule we have, we know is the most economical. 4 or 5 years ago, we met with Dr. Michael Reddick, who is a scheduling expert and who has assisted districts across the country. And during that time, we had a committee that was assembled with representatives from all areas of the district. And we looked at moving toward a block schedule, a full block schedule similar to what Pennsbury operates right now. And the second block schedule we looked at was an 8AB block schedule. And in order to move from the most economical straight 6-period schedule that we have now, which limits the opportunities for choice for our students, particularly those who take co-curricular courses, we wanted to move in a direction to give students more choice. Because of the money associated with it at that time, a straight block schedule was really financially out of the question, and we landed on an 8AB schedule. That 8AB schedule necessitated at that point somewhere between 11 and 13 staff members and an associated cost in the $3 million range. As an offshoot of that, we discussed at length rock block or unit lunch, we affectionately call rock block, which is an hour block of time in the middle of the day where in the first 30 minutes, half of the population would have their lunch, the other 30 minutes, the other half of the population would have their lunch, and it would give kids an opportunity for an oasis in the middle of the day, and be able to approach teachers, be able to go and do club activities, or if they just need to unwind with a friend. And of course, we discussed parameters around that, and we visited many, many schools at that time. There is still a desire to do this high school schedule change among the high school administrators. I think there's an appetite certainly among central office administration to do this, but this is not something that we could do quickly, and it's not something that we're certain if we put a committee back together right now that we would land on that 8AB schedule. Understand that the straight block schedule, similar to what Pennsbury has, and the 8AB schedule, there are some differences, and I'll tap on Dr. Lambert's shoulder to talk to you about the stressors and the differences of two schedules. And at this point, we would like to investigate with our high schools an advisory period to allow students some opportunity to get more face time with adults in the building, and then look at moving towards a high school schedule change moving into the following year, after next year. One of the questions we have for the board is if we are not directed to move forward right now with the high school schedule change, should we continue moving forward with an investigation of that rock blocker unit lunch? All of which, of the three levels, elementary, middle, and high school, this is a pretty big one. And Dr. Lambert, if you would be so kind to talk about the difference in terms of stress and wellness for kids. Two blocks.
So the advantage of going to a full block schedule where a student would have 4 classes one semester, 4 classes the next semester, is they're focused on, it's like when you're in college, you attended a college on a semester schedule, you're focused on 4 subjects and 4 subjects only. Then the next time you're focused on 4 subjects and 4 subjects only. In the AB, you're still focused on 8 subjects. They happen to be every other day, but you have all 8 subjects that you're focused on. And if you think about high school, it's not like you come home on Monday and do homework for Monday that's due on Tuesday, and Tuesday you come home and do homework on Tuesday that's due on Wednesday. You're working on stuff all the time. So the students would still be working on 8 subjects worth of work during that time. So there's a benefit to the students that I don't want to go out and say that the AB causes more stress, but the full block of 4 and 4 allows you an opportunity to reduce some stress on the youngsters because they have less to focus on at a given time.
And just on the other side of the aisle of what Dr. Lambert just spoke about, if you're in the full block and you're taking an algebra course in the first semester, you may not see algebra again and then be expected to take the keystones a year later. So for each one, much like the calendar where it's not going to fit, everybody's, fit everybody perfectly, the same is true with the schedule.
So, and you see the last bullet here with current information, that one of the things that the board and the administration had started exploring prior to the pandemic was start times. And that's something that, we could still explore. However, these changes at each level, regardless of when we start the school day for those levels, all these changes can still apply. So the start time piece can be something that will not have an impact on the other aspects of this. And it's something that, when you look at exploring start times, there are many more impacts to that outside of just our school community. And I know there was some appetite across the county a few years ago for all districts to start, many of our districts were starting to explore that. And like many things, the pandemic put a hold on many things. So, that's something that right now we're just not certain about, which is why we're not having that listed as a very specific thing, a target of focus. But given these items, our administrative recommendation is this, and then we'll ask, we have Mr. Harris here to, if you have particular budgetary questions, he'll be able to answer those. Obviously, we need to analyze the results of the demographic study and make some decisions around what we need to do relative to our challenges with space utilization based on that report, and figure out what those fiscal implications are, which at this point in time, we do not know what those might be. And we'll provide that, recommendation and provide that information starting on March 24th with the board when we have that presentation. We are recommending also that we focus our changes on the elementary level. That's inclusive of the fifth special, gifted programming, math programming, SEL, and really implement a comprehensive revision to our elementary master schedule that incorporates all of these pieces for the start of the 22-23 school year. As Dr. Sanko said, the work at the middle school is it's of the lightest lift of the three levels, and it speaks really to our middle school administration's focus on really trying to create a schedule that allows them the opportunity to connect with kids, provide second chance learning, to make sure kids are in class. And because that is such a light lift, we also recommend that we continue that work for the start of the 22-23 school year. And as Dr. Sanko said, we recommend that we advance the work on the revisions to the high school schedule, but we delay any implementation of that until possibly 23-24 or potentially 24-25. It depends on where that committee, the work that committee feels they need to do. Some of the reason that we have the 2 years there is if you think about making a change to a high school schedule and when that needs to be communicated in the timeline of things. So for example, program planning at the high school happened in January. Our students have already selected their courses. So if we were to make changes to the high school schedule, obviously that can't happen for next year. But if we were thinking about it for the 23-24 school year, that would mean that we would need board approval of those changes probably by November at the latest, because of the work that needs to be done with program planning and all the communication pieces. So 23-24 may actually be a bit ambitious, but I think we need to let the committee, the high school folks, start to do the work first to see where they land. Because if they land exactly where we were when we left off before the pandemic, we may be able to move forward more quickly. So that is our recommendation at this time. Ms. McKee, open it up for questions and thoughts from the board so we can get some direction.
Wow, that's a lot. Thank you. It is, it's a lot. Thank you, you've been busy. So, yes, Mrs. Polly.
So the full block schedule, do students learn better because they can focus more on the subject? Maybe I assume if it's a sport subject, they have time to interact with their teachers and get feedback and get their questions, or they maybe do their work. Do we have studies that show which block schedule is best?
I don't know that block scheduling means that the students learn better, but as Dr. Lambert shared, if you go to the full block schedule, students will have 4 courses to prepare for. The instructional time will increase from our current straight line 6 schedule to the block schedule. The instructional time will increase, and then they would be about equivalent at the end of the semester. So we would be looking at courses by semester rather than year. Currently, if you take Algebra 1, you do not finish the course or meet the requirements until the end of the year. If you took Algebra 1 in a full block schedule, it would be done at the end of the first semester. But I can't say whether or not one is better for learning or not. We know one provides more choice for sure.
Which is the full?
Which is the block schedule.
Mr. Salmon, anything?
Yeah, I have just a couple points. And I think I'll lean on my colleagues with a couple of my points. We have to make a decision on a tech specialist. I'm sorry. Because they're only covered other ESSERs. They're going to either need to go into our budget as teachers or continuous tech specialists. Can they fit in any of these holes that we may need additional staff? These are questions that I think we need to answer sooner than later. The fifth special at the elementary level is something I've been talking and asking about for years. I'd love to see that move forward. I think the elementary schedule in itself needs to be looked at. We did touch on that 2 years ago, and we kind of walked away from it. We know that math needs more time, and we've got to create space within that elementary schedule. So I have no problem moving forward with that, because I think, Mr. Harris, correct me if I'm wrong, you're already working the money into starting that process with the fifth special.
I am.
You are?
Yes.
Yeah.
If I could just ask for some direction, there are several menus of options here. So in order for me to prepare more adequately for finance next week and in future conversations, I'd like to be able to bring projections to you of what these would cost. And obviously, I can turn these scenarios on and off within the system, but I want to be able to memorialize in a slide so that you can see option A, option B, option C, and then what it would cost you. And then obviously, we can adjust the tolerance for a tax increase as it impacts, and then any other, we can account for attrition, we can account for additional reductions in spending to make up these costs, so.
Yeah, and since you brought that up, the IFO over the next 4 years or so is looking at almost 13% worth of Act 1 index possible tax increase. That's a lot of money that we could possibly be raising taxes. And that, Mr. Roosevelt would want to be heavily discussed before we raise taxes. So I think we got to figure out what we do with the tech specialists, so they continue, can they fit the need here? What that would reduce some of the wants here. Fifth special I'm fine with. My reservations with anything else, and I'll defer to my colleagues on this, I and none of us have an idea what a possible new superintendent's thought process is for Council Rock. The last thing I want to do is task our people to do a whole lot of work, and there's a different mindset when that person becomes superintendent. Ben Salem's looking to change to a K-5 program. I don't know if is that palatable for the next person. Is a block schedule on board for the next person? Maybe the next person that wants nothing to do with the block schedule. So I'm a little concerned to do too much work and tasking our people when this district's in a bit of a transition right now. But I won't stand back and say no if the board wants to push forward with this, because whether the new superintendent believes in this process or not, there's some value here from our staff members that have spoken tonight that there's work that needs to be done. I just don't want work done and then we wasted a whole lot of time. Because Andy and his team that went out there and looked at the rock block, the block schedule, you drove here, you drove there. I live the block schedule every day. I look at the block schedule a little differently now. I struggle with putting that much work into it and that whole process going out the window. So that's my only cause of concern. But as far as the fifth special and the elementary schedule, I think that work needs to be done.
May I just comment on one of your comments?
Sure.
Because I think it's important. With the elementary schedule, and I mentioned there was trepidation 2 years ago after we didn't move it forward, but it's important to understand we only have between 9:10 and 3:40. Those minutes don't change. So I mentioned earlier the possible impact to the music program. So a fifth special right now, 5th and 6th grade chorus takes place where it would be a natural fit for the fifth special. That could be a pain point. We know it was a pain point before. The other thing that's important to mention with that 9:10 to 3:40, those minutes we have with the elementary schedule, there will ultimately have to be some trade-off in minutes for academic areas, be it math or ELA or whatever. And I would like to publicly thank the elementary principals because they have worked tirelessly, not just 2 years ago, but they have worked tirelessly to put together another tentative schedule if we were to move forward and implement all these things that you have before you. But I want to be clear with the community, the minutes that we have for math right now in our schedule may not be the minutes if we do all of this moving forward. Chorus for 5th and 6th grade takes place in the middle of the day right now. It may not take place in the middle of the day if we move forward with all of this. So just like I go back to the calendar example, it may not be a perfect fit for everyone.
You know, when our math program is, what is the minutes it's supposed to have? And this is where the struggle was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So I think I like STEAM, I like the fifth special personally. I think it's needed. I think we're probably behind a couple of years in that, and that's being very conservative. But how do you fit it in?
Well, that's why I want to make sure we're all clear. We have between 9:10 and 3:40, 5 days a
You
week.
can't keep them to 5?
There you go.
There's your answer.
There's a solution.
Some of those kids want to stay to 5 o'clock, but listen, I want to hear everybody's comments. I just don't want our team doing too much work and then everything gets thrown out the window, because there's a lot of work that goes into this.
If I could just share another concern, and I'm sure you're thinking of this, but I would feel negligent if I didn't put it out there. We're quicker and more ready to move forward with the fifth schedule, especially at the elementary school. One of the concerns was we'd almost say, okay, move forward with that, and then we do that, and then we come back with the high school schedule and say, we don't have any more money left to do that. So, because they're the two big ticket items there. So, I'm not advocating for one over the other. I just want to make sure that if it's a choice of one over the other, we know that we're making that decision at this time as well.
And to Chuck's point, that's why I mentioned earlier, the high school schedule change has been a long, very, very long ongoing conversation. And while, if you ask me, I think they're both very important, but you can only handle so much at a time.
Financially, mentally, physically,
Yeah.
emotionally,
Staff
literally.
time.
Staffing, yeah. And again, I think, having Mr. Harris is a big win for us, because we need to see the effects of this now, today, tomorrow. But those IFO numbers, they jump off the page at me. That's a big, big deal on what that Act 1 index could go to. You could tax people another 15% in the next couple of years. That's a lot. So we have to be cognizant of that.
Mr. Tate?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. McKee. You make a really good point, Ed, about the transition and a new superintendent coming in. And I asked Dr. Elliott when we chatted a month or so ago, about the high school schedule and the rock block and how that's really near and dear to the heart of a lot of folks. To me, the idea of the rock block is just wonderful. But Dr. Elliott's point was, we can't do everything that we're talking about right now, right at the same time, for reasons of cost, staff time, and that we only have so much capacity. So I feel like the fourth bullet point represents, a compromise. It's going to continue moving forward, but it's not at the same pace as if we had unlimited resources. So some of the other changes that we're talking about, I think, are smaller and more modest, and we can move ahead. And I like that list of recommendations and priorities. I do want to speak to the first bullet point. I am concerned about the unpredictability of Council Rock in terms of growth and demographics. There's a lot going on in our real estate market, and we were surprised when we were close to closing Rolling Hills, and thank goodness we dodged a bullet there and didn't. We have the challenge with Wrightstown. I think it's really important that we continue with the demographic study and take a close look at it and think about one of the things we discussed during redistricting, which I think is one of our real success stories over the past few years. That was long overdue. I think we did a good job with redistricting. And, it's sometimes called spot redistricting. On the other hand, there are school districts, very good ones, that essentially do redistricting or adjustments in feeder patterns every year, because that's what's required. And I think, that's something that we talked about during the redistricting process, and I think the community needs to be aware that this may be a route we have to go as Council Rock continues to grow, with all the development and the generational change. So I'm really glad we're moving forward with the demographic study, and I'm glad that's a high priority.
I just want to be clear on that. That we've already signed off on that. So
Yeah, we did.
So that's
So
gonna
it's
move-
just
Oh, yeah.
what we do as a
Yeah,
result of it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And listen, Wrightstown, Chris and Marcel and I walked that school with Mr. Sanko and.
I was there too.
Dr. Sanko, yeah.
Yeah, we were there
We've
too.
seen all
Yeah.
that school. Yeah, we've seen it. I mean, there's
I
no
know.
doubt that's not a comfortable situation for
Yeah, and-
kids
and-
and families and parents, anybody.
And it could crop up in another elementary next year.
Holland's not far behind it.
Yeah.
I would argue it's probably on face.
Yeah, absolutely.
But spot districting, some, new families, you're now going here. I don't know. I mean, but that's why I'm glad we voted for a 3-year deal with these folks, because I think we're gonna have to see how this plays out. I mean, there's
Yeah.
schools in my neighborhood that have popped up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And where are they going to go?
Yep.
So, yeah, that obviously is, I'm looking forward to seeing how that works itself out.
So, Mrs. Holly, anything further on the recommendations?
No, I think we're good, thank you.
Mr. Hickey, if you're still in the line, do you have any questions or comments on these recommendations?
I still am here on the line. Wow, like you said, that's a lot of work. Hey, you know what? I don't mind. I mean, look at all the work that just got put into this. You can see that a lot of time and effort was put into this. As far as the demographic study, we'll let it. We'll see what those numbers are. I think I'm going to have fundamental disagreements with other board members, but I'm willing to see where this all shakes out. I agree with implementing the fifth special and looking into that and going ahead with it. Like I said, the numbers that we talked about earlier, they speak for themselves, and if this is going to help, hopefully we can work around it. It's a matter of, I guess in some cases, you got to make your choices. Do you want to go with the course or do you want to go with the fifth special? Same thing as it relates to the master schedule at the high school, because obviously you're not going to be able to do this all at the same time. I don't know enough about block scheduling to have a valid opinion on it, although I did like the idea of the rock block that you talked about, because earlier in the evening you were mentioning, the kids need their downtime and they need their, they have trouble with their energy and stuff. I think at a point in the middle of the day where these kids can either A, meet their teachers, or B, meet their friends, would maybe revive them of some of that energy that they would lose later on in the day. The middle school rescheduling seems like a no-brainer, and like you said, I would maybe look into the high school rescheduling, but I don't know how much time I would spend on it based on the fact that I don't know seriously when that's something that's going to be implemented. And that's about it. Like I said, I appreciate that all the work that got put in all these programs by both those that are present and, like you said, the principals and other administrators who obviously spent a lot of time on this. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Mr. Roosevelt?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm liking what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing about this. This is very encouraging. I'm very appreciative of all the work, as always, from the board. This is a wonderful haul of information for us to review. I would like to see, some sort of a 5-year projection on this, but this is the area where, these are the areas that I'd like to be spending dollars in our school. I think this is going directly toward educating the kids, helping the kids become better students, better individuals. So I like a lot of this, but as far as to pick and choose, at this point, it makes it very difficult. So, bullet point number 1, I think it sounds like we're all in agreement on that. Bullet point number 2, I really like the addition of STEM. I think we should continue doing that, inclusive of the fifth special. Great idea. Gifted program, we talked about math programming. This has always been the one that's been lagging in our PSSAs and our keystones and things, so this makes sense that we're looking at it. I like that. I don't know if we've hit the nail on the head with it. SEL, to implement comprehensive revision, or SEL separate from that. I'm unclear whether SEL is class-wide or if this is identifying individual kids that might have this and helping those individuals cope, or how that works. So I'd like to get a little bit more info on that, but
I can answer it now.
Perfect, cool.
The SEL programming would be class-wide.
Okay.
We have, I mentioned we are implementing PBIS at our elementary schools. And that model is a three-tier model, and I don't want to go too much into it, but the SEL is tier one, which is class-wide. Then when you identify problems, you move into interventions for smaller groups of kids. That would be separate from the SEL program. Right?
And I heard that you mentioned that you've got a presentation on this.
Yes.
It's coming down later, so I think we can reserve the discussion on that. Middle school schedule, great idea. I mean, yeah, great idea, especially with it being a light lift. That's fantastic. And I would like to understand more from the high school schedule and what that means. But it does, I do like the notion of rock block and what that implies. So I like a lot of this, but I really would want to wrap my hands around what are the financial implications? Can we make cuts in other areas? Because I think a lot of this is priority. So I need a little bit more for that. It sounds like it's coming. So I'm anticipating seeing more. I like the direction.
Great, and I'm just going to chime in and say I agree. These recommendations are, they're so well thought out. You've done so much good work on it. It makes so much sense. My only question is, I understand this is a great deal to do. We're already seeing some kind of staffing challenges. Can administration take all of this on at the same time, or do we really need to prioritize further and take some out of the menu?
Well, I mean, we can all speak to that. I think that when you look at some of these different aspects, so let's take the second two bullets. When we look at the middle school and the elementary, the middle school principals will, and their staff will own the bulk of that work. So they won't be doing anything with the elementary fifth special. Our elementary principals, will do a lot, and obviously our administrator on special assignment will also be involved in that. And our curriculum coordinators will, cut across all of these, but will be able to handle that. So I think that while, to your question, Ms. McKee, it is a big lift. I think some of the pieces that we already have kind of in motion with this will help make that a little bit lighter of a load, if I can say a little bit lighter. But in the same sense, it's difficult to think about, particularly at the elementary level, making a change by adding the fifth special and not taking advantage of the opportunity to incorporate those other pieces as part of a comprehensive review. From the lens of the load on our teachers, because we always kind of go to that thinking. With the respect of the fifth special in the elementary, our classroom teachers, the only piece to this that would be new learning for them would be the SEL program. Our gifted teachers, if we move forward with the compacted science and social studies, there'd be some curriculum work. Our gifted teachers already understand the social studies curriculum, so it would just be incorporating science. So there'd be some work for them there, but again, they're not teaching the SEL program. Math programming would really target our math specialists and how we're looking at what we're doing for them. They're not doing gifted, they're not doing the SEL program, they would be really targeting that. So I think that it's a lot of work, and our principals will be doing a lot of work around this, but they believe that it is doable to get that done.
Great, that was my question. And again, our last piece there with the high school schedule, having participated in that work, I see the value of it. I would love to see it happen. I think the finances are going to be challenging for us, but I applaud you for this and fully support your recommendation.
So to clarify, so Mr. Harris has any information he needs, because he mentioned, one of the things at the next finance committee meeting is to show how all of this fits in with projections. So are there particular questions or things that the board has that they want us to be able to show in that bigger financial picture that didn't come up tonight? Or Mr. Harris, are there particular questions you want to ask to make sure we know how to put some things together for the board to consider.
So I'd like to hear from the board, and you just popcorn, I want to see Fifth Special, I want to see Rock Block, I want to see, combinations of any of those, any other considerations. I can give you a list of the initiative titles that we currently have and what's in them. And then I can build an additional scenario that would turn those on and off. And then, in addition to that, I can also show you the tax impact. Because currently we build our baseline as 0, which I think it should always be 0, which is different than what we had talked about in the original iteration of our projections, and then build from there, a 1% IFO minus 1% all the way up to the IFO of Act 1, so that you have a wide range to see, hey, make the case for the considerations to cut or to raise taxes, and then to build in the capacity as you're building in your desired goals and dreams. So you have your capital improvement projects, those are always part of the borrowing. We have the Fifth Special. We have the curriculum investments, which do include some of the SEL talk and some of the math and ELA upgrades that are coming in future years that are part of a regular revision. We have the Rock Block. I made one on the fly here with the gifted support. There is one for later school start times that's built in. It's a transportation impact predominantly. And then there are technology investments, security investments. We also have the contractual increases that we've considered in other meetings, such as the transportation contract, the ABM contract, and the substitute costs increase. And I believe, and then there's another scenario for energy costs, which will also be laid into whichever one Mr. Taylor feels is most appropriate to build into next year's or future year's budgets. So, fire away.
Yes.
If it pleases the board, I can put together a couple of menus with Dr. Elliott's input, and then we can get those to you, and it can spell out exactly what's in it, and then we can break out each individual cost similar to what you saw on these slides. 1.1 million for the Rock Block, or I'm sorry, for the Fifth Special. 7 million for new whatever it is, widgets and whiz bangs. We can make those actionable for you or digestible for you, so you're not digging into the detail of the numbers. You see one big number, this is what it costs, and then a projection over 5 years.
Yeah, that would really be great, and it's difficult, I think, for me particularly to provide approval of something in some respect when we don't have all the information. We've got presentations that are upcoming that we haven't had. We've got financial projections that we haven't really analyzed. But this is what I want to be talking about and analyzing. So I kind of want to see it all, and I'd also appreciate areas where maybe we could save. So which is more important when we start evaluating? Maybe we can't have it all. Is the return on the investment more in this area or less in that area? That type of information at least helps me, and I would expect it would help others.
So Mary, let me ask you, just because I feel I need to ask a question. In light of all the conversation we had tonight with loss of, learning loss and assorted things that the kids are struggling with, are we asking too much of our kids to tackle a new schedule, for our staff to tackle new schedules this close? I want it. I'm not, I've been very vocal about the Fifth Special, but if a kid's struggling with what he's doing or she's doing now, and then we're going to turn the world upside down with schedule changes, adding things, is this the time to do that? I feel that I need to ask that question, and I'd be interested to hear from the administration. You have my support. We'll also just listen to kids are struggling emotionally. Mm-hmm. Is this the time to change their schedule even further?
next year.
It's a very good point. It's very thoughtful. It seems to me at least the middle school revision is actually offering some support to those kids. That in particular would address.
And it makes
some of that,
sense. I mean, it makes sense to flip that. I like that. I just had to throw it out there because I just thought about it.
Well, I guess, and I, love to, hear what all of us have to say here, but thinking about our elementary kids and their daily schedule, when we're looking at what those changes are, so we're adding a fifth special for our kiddos that is an opportunity for them to focus on STEAM and hands-on activities that are engaging them in computer science, in technology, in engineering, and cross-curricular connections that'll be part of that I think will enhance their learning and gives them a break from, the core instruction. So from my perspective, I don't see those changes as something that are necessarily burdensome on our students. And when I think about our teachers, as I said earlier, all of these changes at the elementary level have impacts on different groups of teachers. And there'll be some, obviously our classroom teachers are going to have to think about, say, if language arts minutes are cut a little bit shorter because of this, okay, now they just have to think about how do I adjust my instruction? So there'll be some of those implications, but in my perspective, I don't know that this schedule change has a significant impact on our kids' mental health or, what's best for them. But I would love to hear from.
I would say that I would agree with the elementary schedule. I don't think that would have a significant effect on the students. The high school, we just told you they don't have a lot of stamina right now, and we're going to ask them to sit in a class that was 50 minutes, now it's 90 minutes. So I think that would be a very big adjustment, but I also think that's not coming right away. And I've lived through it with my own children, and I've been in districts where we've made the switch to block scheduling. It's a lot. It's a lot for the adults involved in terms of how they teach the curriculum and how you don't end up having 15 minutes of study hall at the end of the period. And also for the kids to adjust to when you change that instruction, you will automatically be changing what you're expecting of kids in terms of their performance and their assessment. So in my opinion, that's the one thing that will have an impact. That's me.
I have a question, and I probably should know this. The fifth special, if we treat it like art, library, phys ed, music, will it be assessed also and part of the report card, in which case report card committee has to kick in?
Yes, or it would be added to, we may not redo the whole report card, but it'll be added to the report card as something that gets assessed.
My comments, Mr. Solomon, to your comment is, there's nothing up there that I don't agree. I agree with everything educationally. And if we look at elementary, I think we're taking a big bite of the apple. And if we're going to do something, I want to do it well. I want to give the people the time to do it. I want to give the students the time to do it. So while I agree with Dr. Elliott, there's not necessarily a big impact on kids, there is a lot of moving parts in bullet point number 2 to take on all at one time. Particularly if we want to isolate something, and I heard a lot tonight about learning loss, and that's been a topic of discussion. I think that's part of helping bridge that gap, but my only word of caution is when we pick what we're going to do, let's be strategic about it so that we could do it well.
Oh, yes, sorry, Mrs. Polly.
So from what I keep hearing is that we are kind of in agreement with everything except the last one, the high school schedule. And I mean, if we're not certain that this is something that is best, or at least best at this time, I don't know why we should even consider it right now. And I don't know if we need to spend more time to figure out if it's worth going into that direction. For the other bullets, I think that we should proceed. I mean, this is, of course, my opinion. And when we have the learning loss and all these other challenges, sometimes it's better to challenge them, challenge the kids both mentally and academically, and make it more interesting. So the more they're engaged and in school, I think they will be better off to perform and learn. So I would, at this point, probably like to proceed with everything except the last bullet, the high school, only because it may be too soon to do it.
I wasn't on that original committee, but from what I understood, my interpretation of what I did participate in, the feeling of the committee was strong about block scheduling. It was just a concern about the costs involved. So I think there is support for it as a model. I agree with you, time-wise, it's not something we can jump into, but I think the reason we wanted to discuss it, we didn't want to 2 years say we want to do this, and it's like, well, we don't have any more money left.
And
I don't know.
that's, so that, when that work was done, the epicenter of that work was the overall high school schedule change. Offshoots of that, rock block, late start times, they were all part of it, but the epicenter of the conversation was the high school schedule change. And then we talked earlier about the straight block versus 8AB and the cost differential. That's how we landed on 8AB. Subsequent to landing on 8AB, the board looked at the finances with the administration and said, time out, we can't do that right now. Let's continue to investigate rock block or unit lunch. And then COVID came along and put an end to that, as well as the late start times. That just to give you some history on it.
Well, and I think too, Dr. Senko, I think you mentioned this, but it is the feeling of our high school administration that we need to make some changes to our high school schedule. So they believe that this needs to happen, but they also recognize this can't happen next year, and they want to take the time to really go back and research and start doing some work again. So that's something which is reflected in our recommendation. Like they really believe this is important for kids, for choice purposes, for their anxiety, for opportunities for our high school students. We think it's important. We just aren't ready to move forward with the plan that we had originally come up with. So.
Do you feel as though you've gotten direction?
I think so. Mr. Harris, are you good with what we need to put together for? Okay.
Wow. It's a big lift.
I think
If I could just offer 2 cents. One of the guiding principles we talked about in developing our budget is leave room for the unexpected, right? And I think what we're exploring is the possibilities of making some really neat things happen for kids. And we know it's going to cost money, right? So the board's cognizant of that. We're going to do our best to control those costs and put them in a package that's saleable to the 9 and to the community, so that and actionable for the team. Because I think if the board gives us the go ahead to do it, build it into the budget, we'll get all that detail across the finish line. But I think it's really important for my cabinet colleagues to understand that if we bake it all into the pocket, that in future years these are our governing. We're putting these high watermarks in the budget so that each year we're not wavering. Because if you put it in there, it's not like we're hiring folks to fire them in the subsequent years. So I think the administration's really carefully weighed their options and put together something that I can deliver to you in a financial picture, and then I believe that they can deliver it from an academic standpoint.
And before going to public comment, are there any final comments from board colleagues? Hearing none. Anyone from the community wish to speak tonight? Public comment?
I tend to have a lot of questions.
And if you would just give your name and where you're from, and so we may not have.
That's great, you can have, if you have the answers, great, if you don't, that's fine too. I'm Jennifer Kessner, and I live in Holland, I have 5 kids, and one at every level in the district. So, well, 3 and, anyway, I have kids at every level of the district. So the presentation is great. It seems to put a lot of hard work into it. I see a lot of great things, and I'm excited about stuff. One of the things that I'm mostly concerned about, like everybody else at the table, is the learning loss. So, okay, I took my notes and, okay. So one thing that I observed with my kids being at home through COVID, I noticed that my girls handled, I have 3 girls, 2 boys. My 3rd grader is a boy and my 9th grader is a boy. And I noticed that my girls were able to handle the change a lot better than my boys did. And so I wonder if you're doing a gender comparison regarding maturity. Let me put my glasses, I forgot. My eyes are going. And in speaking with going out and speaking with the community, it seems like a lot of families were struggling with their sons more than their daughters with making those adjustments. And so I was wondering if there's going to be a comparison done with what you're seeing in the schools. And then are there courses? I see a lot, I see a lot being done for learning loss at the elementary level. With our experience at Hillcrest, it's been amazing. And with the academy, the summer academy, it was a great opportunity for my kids to participate in, so I want to say thank you for that. As far as the middle school and the high school, I'm not seeing as much, but then again, the kids are more independent, so it's not as much parent involvement as much as I give at my elementary level child. So one of the things that I'm wondering is with the high school kids that are struggling, or even the middle school kids, are there courses for study skills for students, especially for the 9th graders that are struggling with study skills and everything that goes into it, time management? Then I know Dr. Elliott, you had mentioned about the school counselors doing screening in place in Summer Academy. I was concerned at what grade level are those school counselors screening the kids, because I'm not sure it's necessarily being, with our experience, I didn't really have that sense at certain levels in the upper grades as much as the lower grades. And let's see, and Mr. Roosevelt had mentioned about the peers helping, or someone helping, having programs during the school year. I know with my professional background is in special ed and school counseling, and when I was working, we had peer mediators that helped other students during the school year. I know the National Honor Societies are available, and I know things had slowed down because of COVID, and things are starting to open back up. But if we can do more with peer mediation, peer mentoring programs, that would be fantastic. And then my thought with Portrait of a Graduate, I just wanted to share, my husband's family, they were all alumnus from Council Rock, and most of them are in local positions. So I know the focus is in the here and now, but Council Rock that's the reason why we selected to stay in Council Rock. I'm seeing that the experiences that my family has had, they're very global in what they're doing, and they're professional. So I think Council Rock is going to provide that, no matter whether it was in the past and they'll continue that. Okay, and then Dr. Lambert, in regarding the subjects with the science and English for the gifted program, usually there's a prerequisite of math for science, So I kind of wanted to get a better understanding, and maybe that would be presented later on, why it was like English and science, and then later on was math and social studies, and how that would tie in.
If I may answer, we did start to map out what some of those courses would be.
Okay.
And it does get a little bit complicated because kids take math in different sequences. So
Right.
we're trying to work it out so kids have equal opportunities across the grade levels. Because it could end up that some kids would have 3 in 9th grade going 1 in 10th grade. So I hear what you're saying, we are looking at that.
Okay, perfect. And then as far as, with all the bullets with what you would like to bring into the school and the changes, I really would like to ask for you to postpone to maybe the year 25, 26. Our current 9th graders are graduating in 25, and as you had mentioned in the meeting, a lot of them are struggling. And as a parent of a 9th grader, I would like to see you postpone that further for the changes at the high school. Philosophically with block scheduling, in my educational learning way back in the day, block scheduling was for the districts were more the adult school districts where they were trying to reduce behavior issues. So now I know it's like 20 years later since I've studied it, but one of the reasons why we selected Council Rock was because they were not doing the block scheduling. So, and one of the points that you had mentioned, Dr. Lambert, regarding, when you have math in the spring of one year and then you won't have it for spring for the following year, that's a big concern for us. So, but other than that, and regarding the SEL program, our teachers are doing so much right now in providing curriculum, and presently the role in the classroom, we have the school counselors and the school psychologists come in and do these special programs to work on community development and how to interact with one another. I'm just curious what the role, if the teachers are doing it, what will the role of school counselors be in place of that? So thank you for your time, and thank you.
Any other public comment? Yes, sir.
Jonathan Siemens, I live in Newtown. So there's been a lot of interesting things talked about here tonight, and some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. I feel like the thing that we need to do as a community, as a district, is try to get back to the basics of what the core mission of our school should be. I feel like we're trying to be too many things to too many people, and I know that there are obviously families and people that need to get some services from the schools that perhaps they can't get on their own or in their own lives, but I'll give you a quick example. I mean, some of the things we talked about here tonight, like we still don't even have a bus system that works consistently. My kids do after-school activities. I can't believe we don't have after-school buses. For families that don't have a parent or friends that are available to drive kids to and from after-school activities, I feel like that's a core function of a school district that we're not performing at an adequate level right now. They talk about things like Portrait of a Graduate or SEL or logos for the Portrait of a Graduate program. The work with the U-Penn group. Why are we doing that when we can't even do the very basics? My family, I'm lucky, I have a job that provides health insurance. My kids have a pediatrician. Last week, my son came home with a health report from his nurse that had down to all his, height, weight, BMI. Did she discuss health issues with him without my wife or me there? Why is the school doing that? That's not a function of our school. At least I don't think it should be. These are just distractions from what should be our core mission, and which is educating our kids. And we're obviously talking about, we talked tonight about the learning loss, and some people in this room sound like they're surprised by it. I mean, if you've been to any of the board meetings in the last 18 months, I mean, there's people in this room that voted to keep our schools closed because it wasn't safe, and now they're acting surprised that the kids are falling behind. I don't know how you all interact, the board members, with our schools. I know that from talking to some of you that you do go out and see the schools, but like, there are things going on, like at Council Rock North right now. There are multiple math teachers that teach what is called a flipped classroom. If you don't know what that is, I urge you to look it up. And you can look in non-conservative ideological leaning sites and groups like The Atlantic Magazine or it's one of the think tanks in Washington or in New York that's not the Manhattan Institute, but anyways, it's a liberal leaning group. It doesn't recommend that for classes like math. And I can tell you my daughter's algebra teacher is using videos that she recorded last year and the year before during the pandemic. My daughter learns her lessons at home by herself, watching these pre-made videos from 2 years ago or 1 year ago. Then when she goes to class, the teacher uses a program. The teacher never teaches in front of the entire class and answers questions. She sits at her desk and uses a program that watches the kids doing their math work on their Chromebooks. And I can tell you, like my daughter last year was the Newtown Middle School Student of the Year. She's not a dummy. She's distinguished honor roll all the time still. But her math scores are going down. And her math score in the PSSA this past year was lower than it's ever been. And I wonder, like all these things that we've done, what are they doing, to all of our kids? I urge you, if you don't know about this flipped classroom, please take a look. Like I'm not making that up. And to have, I'd like to just add, and I'm going to name some specific board members, so please don't get upset, Mr. Tate. But I really do wish that, like Denise Brooks and Andy Block could be here to try to help us, and I can't believe I'm saying that, to try to help you all solve the problems that they voted to help create. I mean, to sit here and act like, oh my God, the kids lost opportunities in the classroom and act surprised by it.
Excuse me, Mr. Siemens?
Yeah.
I welcome your comments. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
I would ask you, please, it's not really a forum to disparage others. If you have
I'm not
comments.
disparaging others. They voted for those things, and I'm commenting on the fact that they voted on them. I didn't call them any names.
And I believe we're getting off topic. If you would
Well,
focus your remarks,
these are my public comments, not your public
and I
comments.
would prefer that you not make them personal to individuals. So.
Okay, but I brought up board members' names before, and your solicitor has said that as long as I'm addressing the chair, which is you,
That's correct.
I can mention their names, which I've done.
Sir, please proceed. I just ask your indulgence to be respectful.
I believe that I am being respectful. I think we should be thanking those board members that stood up to you and Mr. Tate and Denise and Andy Block. And because if you guys had your way, our kids would have been home much longer, and that learning loss that we're talking about now would have been much greater. And to say that there wasn't anything we could do, we know because there are states in our country that were open for business without masks in person in fall of 2020.
Sir,
And
could
we
you
didn't
keep
know.
it relevant to our business tonight?
Well,
Out of respect for the late hour, could you please make it relevant to our
Mr.
business?
Solomon, like, I can't make a public comment.
You can make a public
I'm
comment.
chairing the
She's
meeting,
chair
sir.
of the meeting.
Okay, well, you need a thicker skin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siemens. Is there further public comment tonight?
I had one more question that I forgot to
And
mention.
again, in respect for the late hour, if
It's
you would
just gonna
please be
be
brief.
one, it's gonna be brief.
Or send an email.
It's regarding the rock block, where students could have lunch and then also see their teachers. Being in the schools, I don't think every kid will take advantage of that. And I'm just concerned with some of the issues that are going on in the bathrooms at the high school. How are we gonna, have that supervision in the hallways, where these students are going logistically. So that was my final thought. Thank you.
Any further questions, comments? And seeing none, we are adjourned.
Mr. Siemens, I do respect.